McGill hockey alumnus. I'll be your host for the afternoon et je voudrais remercier Ken Morin pour son bon travail ce matin. Merci, Ken. Again, as people are tuning in right now, lots of people are loading into the call. I'd just like to acknowledge the fact that there's so many attendees from a wide range of disciplines, men and women from Canada, US, Europe, coaches from minor hockey to pro, as well as people from outside of hockey, including alumni, business professionals, coaches from other sport, and university professors. And we note this because we will be using breakout rooms today, a little bit different than yesterday. And in those breakout rooms, we're going to be able to get to interact with some of these really interesting people in the crowd. So some housekeeping. Today's the second day of the seminar. The morning was in French. And it's just like to note that it's incredibly impressive that our speakers, the time and energy that they put into these presentations that they will be presenting, not only in French, but they will be doing that same one in English this afternoon. It's amazing how dynamic these guys are. So the presentation will last approximately 25 to 30 minutes, followed by, we'll put everybody into rooms of 4 or 5 people, and we'll generate some conversation. A great opportunity to network. A couple other notes stemming from yesterday. We contacted Hockey Canada, and for those of you who are doing your accreditation, Hockey Canada professional development points are available from participating in the seminar. You can email me, and I'll send you the forms to fill out. And also a note from Jamie Compon. He wanted to relay a message that he was not able to access his chat function yesterday during the presentation. And he knew that someone was trying to message him. So whoever was trying to message him, you can just touch base with me, and I'll give you his email and put you guys in contact. So right now, I'd like to open it up to a word from the head coach of McGill men's hockey team, Liam Hillis, and he'll talk about Friends of McGill Hockey and the purpose of the event. Liam?
Awesome. Thank you, Dave. Bonjour, bienvenue à tout le monde. Hello and welcome, everyone. On behalf of myself and Friends of McGill Hockey, we're very appreciative of you joining us here today. I just want to take a moment to share with you what Friends of McGill Hockey, or FMH for short, is. FMH is a special interest group comprised of McGill hockey alumni and proud supporters of our men's hockey program. They help to organize and plan alumni gatherings in support of our historic team each and every year. We're very grateful for the undying support and investment that they put towards our program, and we're very thankful for everything that they've done for us, especially over the past season that we've had. The purpose of this FMH event, for those that weren't here yesterday, raise money for the families of 2 of our recently passed alumni at McGill, Kelly Nobes and Martin Ruche. All proceeds from this event will be distributed equally into RESPs for their children. And right now to date, I can say that we've raised almost $16,000 and had roughly 200 participants and donations through sign up on Eventbrite. So that's really tremendous. This has been an opportunity for us to bring the hockey community together for a greater purpose. And to each of you in attendance and those that have donated, we sincerely appreciate your support. Lastly, I'd like to just give a couple of thank yous to our organizing committee, comprised of your host and main organizer, David Urquhart, our technical director, Chris LaPearl, Neil Blunden, who is our social coordinator, Ken Morin, executive and host in French, Marty Raymond, executive and presenter, Earl Zuckerman, one of our executives and social guys, and our president of FMH, Mike Nelson. You've all done a tremendous job putting this event together and should be very proud. I'd also like to give a big shout out to Howard Monk from FME Sports, who's been our title sponsor. I'm looking forward to today's talk from my mentor, Marty Raymond, and my former roommate and line mate and captain, Pat Delisle-Houde, along with former Senators head coach and McGill alumni, Guy Boucher. Thanks everyone for your generosity, and enjoy today's events.
Thank you, Liam. Now I'll introduce our first speaker of the afternoon session, his second presentation of the day, Guy Boucher. Guy's extensive coaching experience includes time spent as head coach of the Ottawa Senators, Tampa Bay Lightning, Hamilton Bulldogs, Rimouski Oceanic, Drummondville Voltigeurs, where he won President's Cup, and SC Bern in Switzerland, where he also won a League Cup. He has also represented Canada internationally, winning gold as assistant with Canada's U20 and U18 teams, and as head coach of Canada's Spengler Cup team. He skated for McGill from 1991 to 95, captaining the team in his final year. He earned 2 bachelor degrees from McGill and later earned a master's degree in sports psychology from the University of Montreal. And I always find it interesting when Guy speaks, because it's so clear that he has such a thorough knowledge of all aspects of the game. And I think you'll take that out of his presentation today. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to Guy. I'll let you take over on your presentation on how to mobilize and motivate a group.
Thanks. Thanks, David. And I'm going to start believing what you're saying there. So you got to stop. Well, thanks for having me. It's a great cause. Marty and Kelly were great people I played with, and with terrific families. So thanks everyone for being here. Obviously, my topic here is motivating individuals, yes, but mainly we want to get to the group part. But so motivating and mobilizing group. For me, of course, I have my way. So this is not the way. This is how I've done it, and I want to make sure that if people do it in a different way, don't feel that you're necessarily doing something wrong. It's just my way of doing things. So first is the way I go about it is I never believe that team first is how you start. I don't believe in that. I believe that it becomes teams first far into the season because I believe people are where they are primarily for themselves. And if you got 25 guys, well, you got to figure out 25 ways to coach. And I've always approached coaching like a forest. There's no machine in the world that will cut all the trees at the same time. You have to cut one tree at a time, and eventually you've cut your forest. So that's the way I approach my group and my teams. So my general recipe is always the same. Number one is connecting, activating, and then 80-20. So that's how I start with my individuals. What I mean by that is, I hate to use the word managing somebody. It's like you own them. Today, especially today's day and age, we got to talk about connecting. And what I mean by that is the two main ingredients for me is always the same start is enthusiasm when you meet somebody and you want to show them that they're not only they're important, but it's exciting to get to know them, to have information about them. So enthusiasm is the number one ingredient of anything a coach does. Once you lose that, you lose everything. Two is how much you care, how much you can show an individual that you care about them personally rather than just the hockey player. And so first and foremost, connecting. You look at our kids today, if you take the connection away from their iPads or the internet's gone, they flip out. Well, it's the same with the hockey players now. So you got to continue having and working on that connection, and it starts the way I just explained. Now, I don't believe in motivating people. Past the age of 15, 16, I'm sorry, people have their own motivations to be where they are. They're from a certain family. They got their own values. They've had some sort of adversity or many or difficulties in their lives. They have friends. They've got all sorts of things that make you develop into the person that you are and the motivations that you have. So to have the pretension to give somebody a new motivation, I think is wrong. The way I go about it is by getting to know them, you figure out what's their motivation. Some of them might be money. Some of them might be fame. Some of them might be just being with friends. Some of them is the sheer joy of competition and so on. Somebody, it might be they want to prove something to somebody. But you find that out and then you activate that. So that's the one thing I found was extremely useful over the years. And one way I go about it too is my 80-20. So I said connect, activate, and then 80-20. 80-20 for me is this. Every individual will have their strengths and will have their weaknesses. And if you spend 80% of the time, like most of us will do to start, is spend 80% of the time on the things they have to improve while their weaknesses. So eventually they'll improve, but they're average at best because they're weaknesses. Now, you spend only 20% of the time on your strengths. Well, what's going to happen with them is they're going to diminish. And so they're going to be average. So you're average. How do you feel? Average. You want to come to the rink? Average. How do you feel about your team? Average. How do you feel about your performance? Average. So it's the opposite of what you're trying to accomplish. So contrary to what you might think, I'll spend 80% of the time on somebody's strengths. For example, Stamkos skates and shoots. So we talked about right off the bat, hey, these are your expertise. I want you to become an expert at that. So we're going to spend 80% of the time talking about that, practicing that, and making sure that that's what's important. And there's still 20% left that you will improve over time, not overnight. And they're still going to be average eventually, but they're your weaknesses. So every day you feel how? You feel like an expert. You feel great about what you're bringing. You feel indispensable. You got enthusiasm. And that's how you influence the rest of your group and, of course, yourself. So connect, activate, and 80-20. So when do I do that? I start right away in the summer. Summer is huge for me. It's all about the individuals. Summer means maybe in the middle of the summer, beginning of the summer. It means once the guys are back and they're doing their own skating before the training camp starts. But for me, I attack the players one by one before I meet the group. So I will have met every player once I get a new job, an hour and a half to 2 hours, sometimes even 2.5 hours before I see them as a group. Because if you attack them as a group, you're going to get everything. A third that don't get you, a third that think that you're great, and another third that don't really know. So every player has had that individual meeting where you get into their lives and I take notes. I got my journal that I come back on all the time, because when things don't go well, very often we try to get the hockey down their throat, and it has nothing to do with that. It's about who they are and their past, and I can always go back on that. Also, what I use is a touch chart to keep myself and my staff accountable. So when the year starts, every week or every 2 weeks, depends on my group, we sit down with the staff and we look, okay, this individual, who touched them this week? Touched them means I talked to him 5 minutes here. I had a coffee with them. We were in the parking lot together. I was on the ice practicing shots with them. I did power play video with them, or I sat down with him in another play. Anything that means that you've connected with that person in some way or another. So then, okay, Guy Boucher, yes. Marty Raymond, yes. Crawford, yes. Oh, no, my goalie coach didn't. Video coach didn't. All right, three out of 5. All right, next guy, 4 out of 5. Perfect, 5 out of 5. All of a sudden you get to a guy, you go, 0. None of us have touched this guy this week. And we recognize sometimes it's been 2 weeks in a row and none of us have touched this guy. It's urgent that we recognize this guy before we got issues with him. Or it's the opposite. Then you realize, okay, this is why we're having problems with this guy. He doesn't feel important. Nobody's talked to him, and we don't even know where he's at in his mind and his game. So that's just a way to keep yourself accountable. So now my second point will be here, and deals with the individual. I get that question all the time. How do you deal with specific individuals? That kind of guy, that kind of guy. So of course, there's thousands of types of individuals, and I'm not going to go over all of them, but I'll categorize them in 4. Stars, projects, prospects, and difficult cases. So I'll start with the stars. How do you deal with stars? First of all, they're all different, but there's things that are common to all of them that I've had, whether it's Marty St. Louis or it's Carlson or other guys. The first thing is, we want to put them in a box and we want to put them in a group and in a group setting. But really, the number one thing you have to do is acknowledge their difference. Acknowledge how special they are. It's been their fuel their whole life. If you take that away, you take their fuel away. And if you take their fuel away, and that's your alpha male, that's your Wonder Woman, that's your top dog, well, guess what you're doing? You're killing your team. So you have to acknowledge and embrace, and actually you want him to feel even more special. And once he recognizes that you feel that about him, he's got wings and he's bought into you. The other thing that's important is you got to keep them close and involved. The minute you don't do that, they're going to start thinking in their minds. I'll give you an example. At Tampa, my first year, I've got, the St. Louis and the Cavaliers and those guys, and they were awesome. We had a terrific relationship. I'd speak to Marty all the time. His son played with my son and so on. And so the second year, we had 7 new players. We traded 4 more guys. Anyways, we had 11 guys that were not with our team the previous year. So guess what I put my focus on? I put my focus on 11 guys because they don't know what we're about. They don't know what we've been doing. So I put most of my energy in that, thinking, okay, Marty knows, the Cavalier knows, those guys, they know what we're supposed to do. They know what I'm about. But guess what? I got the conversations with some of those guys. Well, hey, what happened? What do you mean what happened? Well, we had a great relationship. I know, we still do. No, last year you were talking to me all the time. And now something went wrong. No, I just, I thought you guys got it. And that was a mistake. That was a huge mistake, because then once you've lost that, then you lose your group. So that mistake I've never made again. So projects now. All right. Mostly what I've seen with projects, guys who are in a rut or struggling or have lost or weak or have tough moments, for me, the tendency is always to think, okay, I'm going to help them by adding stuff. Okay, I'm going to give them this. I'm going to do video with them. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And the big problem is most of the time, it's about taking out stuff. It's about trimming. So for me, the projects, the people that are having difficulties, it's more about taking out stuff, taking the heaviness away than it is about adding stuff. Finding something very specific and very clear and very attainable, an identity that they can relate to, and focus on that one particular thing so that they don't get lost mentally and emotionally in thousands of things. And that, I'll give you an example. Bergenheim came to us at Tampa, and he had been a first-round pick with the Islanders. And you go, okay, he should be confident. He wasn't at all. He was lost. And sitting down with him, I realized he had so much pressure, not just because he was a first-round pick, but because they'd been comparing him to the next Forsberg. So can you imagine the pressure on somebody being told that he's the next Forsberg? So the minute you don't have a good game, you feel like you're disappointing everybody, and it's a downward spiral. So we talked about, okay, you're not Forsberg. Nobody's Forsberg. And it doesn't matter if you're a first-round pick or if you're a 10th-round pick. It's about now. So it's about taking all that stuff away and getting rid of the emotion to get to the reasoning of, okay, who are you? What are you? And that's great if you're that. So we talked about being Mr. Pinball, being the guy, because he was awesome. He's a thick guy. He's awesome, forcing himself inside those dots and getting to the net and getting dirty goals. And we made that something huge on our team because we had some other guys that had a lot of skills. We didn't really have a lot of that. So he became extremely important for us. And he was probably our best player in the playoffs and signed a big contract somewhere else, but signed a big contract. So just in one example of trimming out. Now prospects, kids that are coming in, new guys are supposed to be good eventually. To me, it's almost always about the same thing. It's about managing the expectations. I just talked about the first round. That kills most of the kids. And one of the reasons, it's their own expectations, but it's also everybody else's expectations that they hear with all the media now. It's even more difficult than before, a lot more anxiety than there was before. And the one main reason is this. When you're young and you go from one league to another, well, there's 1 year difference sometimes, or you're the same age. But then once you get to junior or college, there's 4 year difference with some guys. So the disparity about from where they are now to where they're going to be in 4 years is gigantic. So therefore, it's more difficult for them to see that eventually they'll be that good. But they're so disappointed in what they look like right now compared to the guy that's a fourth year vet. Well, it's even worse in the American League. It could be a 7 or 8 year difference. So it's very, very difficult to impress right off the start in those calibers because the players that have been there for so long are just so good. Not because you're not as good as them compared to when they started, but right now. And it's worse than the NHL because now you get a first-round pick and everybody thinks because you're a first-round pick, you're a superstar. While that's not the case for the great majority of those guys, but then they have to deal with the expectations of that. And now you deal with a guy that's 15 years ahead of you on your team. So just managing those expectations changes everything for the young guys. So whether it's Couturier at 15 or Pacioretty or Shabbat, those guys, it was always about the expectations and giving them the luxury of not being there yet and make them understand it's okay. And there is a process and we all understand it. Difficult cases. That's always the question I get most of the times. How do you deal with guys that you hate? Listen, if you're going to love the guys that you love, well, any dummy can do that. And I love my kids. They're great. They love me. I love them. That's an easy one. So you're going to be good as a coach only if you're able to love the ones you don't love. And it's hard. And you got to find a way. And sometimes you love them one day, you hate them the other. But it's your job to figure out how to love the unlovables. And for me, it's always about the same thing, going back to why are they acting this way? Why do they have walls? Why does he have such a poor attitude, such a poor work ethic? There's always a reason. And the worse they are, the bigger the wall, the tougher the wall you have to break to get to them. And really, it's about their past. It's about who they've been, what they had to go through. So for me, those guys is always the same. And I'm not going to give you names because I'm going to get repercussions from that. But There's some really, really good players that were hell to work with, but in the end, it was always about digging deep into their background. That was the only way I found over the years, and I've had great success with that because it's what I love doing the most. So digging deep in their background. Example, got a guy, got kicked out somewhere, got kicked out another place by good coaches, comes to you, you try him, then you realize, holy moly, I know why he got kicked out. I'd kick him out right now too. So you got the choice at that point. So I pick up the phone. I'm going to dig deep. His peewee coach, his bantam coach, his soccer coach, even if he's a hockey player. I've learned that he did something in school. Call a teacher. I called his coaches in junior. I asked parents. I asked the people that know them. So I build a portrait of what I know, and then you realize, okay, I get it now. His parents are separated. It's a fight between the two. The dad's embarrassing in the stands. He's created problems with coaches in the past. So you name it, or a guy got picked on. There's racial issues. There's anything you can imagine. And that's why the kid has that wall. He protects himself. So the only way to get to him is to dig deep, show him that you got some information that you like to share with him, not because you're going to put it in his face, but because you want to get to him and you care about him, the person. And all of a sudden you get kids crying, adults crying, because finally somebody breaks that wall and cares enough to do the work to get to them. And then all of a sudden you get a totally different person. And I got one or two cases in mind where these guys became great NHL players and totally different people. But if I had just quit, that never would have happened. And it's because you dig deep, you get to the root of why they act that way. There's always a reason. So that's what I do with difficult cases. So now going from the individual to slowly getting to the group part, for me, yeah, the group dynamics count after you've taken care of the individual and you know what you got. So we measure stats and analytics, and then we look at a player. This is who he is, and that's what he's given me. And to me, you're missing out on the most important part. So that's why analytics for me, yeah, it gives you a part of the information, but there's so much you're missing. You're actually missing the most important, is measuring and quantifying your intangibles. And I've spent years trying to figure out how to have tools to measure my intangibles. Intangibles meaning not just how they play, but what kind of a person they are to who else is around them. The interactions, the links, the bridges amongst them. Who are they to who on the team? And everybody is contagious. Everybody influences. You think you're staying back there, you're not influencing anybody. Yes, you are, because by being neutral, you're influencing everybody. By being negative, you're influencing everybody, and the same on the positive side. So by keeping in mind that everybody affects everybody, I try to make a sociometric portrait of my team, meaning, I know it's a big word, but I put together the information to see who's what to who's a leader in what, who gravitates around who. Because the thing is, you want to kill cliques. It's the death of your team, and you want to make sure that it becomes a team. So yeah, you got to go from individuals to my next point is relationships. So the one thing I want to do is promote and facilitate not relationships, but new relationships. The key is the new part. You want to force inhabitual relationships, like I said, to kill cliques, but also to spread and grow your intangibles amongst your players. It's the only way that you're going to mobilize a group, or else it stays individuals, and they even become cancers. Even if they're good individuals, they can become cancers because of the interactions they have with everybody. So things I do to promote new relationships. Example, coach's room, GMs, every time I get in there, I make them spend some money. They hate me at first for sure, and they hate me at the end because they fire me. So somewhere in between there, we find a way to get along. But at the beginning, what I do is I change the look of our coach's room. I open it up. So if there was 5 coaches' room and we're all in our little cubicles, that's gone. So pull down the walls, and then we're all together. I have a sliding door so that I can be with them. And of course, when the GM comes in or I need a personal talk with somebody, I can close it. So I show the players and the staff that it's going to be all about relationships, not just the quality of the people that we bring in. Another example is the dressing room stalls. I spend so long on deciding before the year where everybody sits. Because if you just let them be, They're going to sit with their buddies. They're going to stay away from the guys that they hate. They're going to make sure that they're in a position where they're in their comfort zone. And that is not what you want if you want to grow your intangibles. So I evaluate the leaders, the rookies, the old guys, the young guys. Hi, you got 2 French guys here. No, we're separating that. Okay, you got 2 Swedes there. We're separating that. And the reason is you want them to mingle with everybody else. And I'll use my leaders, for instance. I've got 7. Okay, I'm going to spread them around the room. And I'm going to have them have missions around them. Okay, you have a rookie with you. You have a kid that's similar to you. You're going to relate to this guy here. Oh, we've had issues with a certain guy. He's got personal issues. You're a calm guy, so that's going to be good for you. So there's all kinds of reasons that you put people in certain places. And so the stalls are put in a situation where you know it's going to grow your intangibles. So then we get like the rooming list, for instance. You go on the road as a junior team. Well, I decided which guy was with who. Why? And I took note of that, because then after that, what I would do is I check up later on what we did. And if we did open it up or we didn't see what was happening, it was always the same guys together. So those are things I would look at. So that brings us to the chemistry part. For me, it's always chemistry above status. You got your individuals, create new relationships, then all of a sudden you start having chemistry in your group. And it's all about chemistry over status, because for me, for instance, okay, these are the top 2 line guys. No, they are what they are right now. And if there's a 3rd line guy that has chemistry with a 1st liner, I am definitely going to tap into that. Why? Because you're going to create unexpected growth. You got top 2 line guys and you don't have any more. So how can you grow as a team? You want to make sure that you promote from within. You want to show them that you can go from a 4th line to a 2nd line. You want to show that it's not just about the 1st line guy that gets his cookie. And so by using guys that have chemistry, you're gonna have success with less. For example, we had Payet, Hoffman, and Peugeot. People are looking at that like, what is that kind of a line? What the hell is the coach doing? How come Hoffman's not with the top 2 line guy? How come Pyatt's not a 4th line, and so on and so on? Well, here's the reason. It's because when I put Peugeot on the ice, he had to play against the 1st lines because he was our best. All right, so that means he's going to play against best players. Mike Hoffman needed to grow a little bit defensively, so I put him with Peugeot, who was our best, and at the same time put him against the 1st line, so I show him confidence that he can get to being a good defensive player. Then, okay, Peugeot's going to need some help here when we lose the puck. So who am I putting out there? I got Payet, who's a 4th line guy, ends up on the 3rd line, gets all that ice time playing against the 1st line. Everybody values his work ethic. He becomes one of the guys that made us have a terrific work ethic because I valued his work ethic. So all of a sudden you got a 1st line, a 3rd line, a 4th line guy together. And now, what line is that? It played against the 1st lines. It made us win so many games in playoffs. So is it a 3rd line, or is it a 2nd line, or is it a 1st line? So basically, we've created depth with no depth or with lesser depth. So for me, chemistry over status or what it's supposed to be is way more important, and that's something that I like to tap in. Now, continuing on the group thing, identifying and specifying your leadership is everything. I'm going to show you something after, but status and age and experience doesn't mean you're a leader at all. Very often we get lost in that. We're so wrong. You can have a 30-year-old that's absolutely a cancer of your team, and you act as if he's one of your leaders. So everything for me is about influence. For me, leadership, if you have influence, you have leadership. You have a lot of influence, you have a lot of leadership. You have poor influence or no influence, then you're not a leader, period. No matter how old you are, no matter how many points you have, that's not leadership. So specifying what you're a leader in is the key. Are you a decision leader? Are you a task leader? Are you a social leader? Are you a disciplined guy? Are you a guy that supports others? Are you a guy that pushes others? Are you a guy that pulls others? So specifying and understanding what those guys are is everything. So to find that out, because we think we know, but we don't really know. The players know, though. They're together all the time. So that's when I bring in the sociometry thing. I'll show you what I do. It's not very professional because it's just my drawings here, but it's what I use in Tampa, for instance, but with every team. If you look, let's say, for parties, and well, you are hurting his leadership because you're not putting him in his chair and giving him the rope to do things that he does well. But Ryan Malone, for instance, though, all of a sudden, he's the big guy. So you use him in his leadership, and you explain to him, once you have that information, that, hey, the guys recognize you, go ahead, run with this, do more, you're allowed to, they like you, they love you, and I love you too for that, and I'm going to use you. So all of a sudden, you valued specifically the types of leadership that you have on your team. So of course, your intangibles grow extremely fast because you're asking the right things to the right guys, and they will have the right impact. So if we move on now and say, okay, we've taken care of all that, we have a group later on in the season. Now you can say, okay, now we got a group, we got a team. A way to approach it for me to mobilize a group is to look at a group in three. I call it the 1/3 approach. In psychology, it's proven that, you know, you could be the worst teacher, the worst coach, or the worst president, the worst guy doing a seminar. You're still going to get a third of your group, no matter how bad you are, because they're smart, they care about the subject, they connect with your personality, and so on. You could be the best coach, and you're still only going to get a certain part of that. And you have to recognize that when you address a group, there's going to be 1/3 that connect with you. They're at the top. You've got them. There's going to be 1/3 that, hey, no matter what you do, you just don't have them. They don't care. They don't like you. They don't understand. It's not their way of doing things, and so on and so on. They're tired. You name it. And there's a group in the middle, and that's the 1/3 that is probably the most important. Yeah, you have to spend time with your top guys, 100%, and you can't neglect them, like I said before. And you do have to spend time with your 1/3, but most of your efforts at some point have to be with that second tier that's in the middle. Why? Because that's the one that oscillates between going to the top or going down to the bottom. And if you don't take care of it, you don't put your efforts with that, well, it's just going to happen. And then it depends on your leadership. Now there's less and less leadership than it used to be. So you have to do a lot more work that way. If you're Boston with Shara and Bergeron, you got such a strong culture, you know, that second group has already been drawn to the top real quick by those leaders. And then you could spend more time with that last third. But really, you have to recognize who's that in that second third. You do that as a staff, you talk about it, you figure it out, and then you put your efforts and your time in it. Because here's why. You want to get to the power of the mass. Power of the mass is stronger than the power of the coach. Power of the coach, after a while, you know, you lose some power, it's circumstantial. But the power of the mass is like in society. That's what decides. In a democracy, hey, we go vote, and the mass is going to decide where it's going. In the dictatorship, well, the dictator is going to dictate until the mass has decided, hey, we're a lot more than you, we're fed up, you're gone. So that's what's happened in the history of the world. So it's the same thing on your teams. So you want to create the power of the mass, but on the upper echelon. Here's what I mean. If you spend all your time with the last third and you listen to the, oh, you know, you're as good as your weakest link, well, that's bullshit. Why? Because you can be as strong as you want at the bottom. If your top's no good, well, you're no good. So you're as strong as where your mass is. And so work on the bottom tier, it's going to be a best in the middle tier. So guess where you're going to be? In the middle, average. But if you work on that second tier and bring it up to the top, where's your mass? Your mass is at the top. And that mass is strong, and it will pull the last third of whatever you couldn't do with that last third. So now, that's what I mean about power of the mass. I'll give an example with power of the mass. In practices, I always make the whole team pay for somebody's laziness, for some being late, or somebody's attitude. And so, for instance, you get a guy coming late on the ass. All right, boys, thanks so-and-so, 3 laps around. And then the guy's lazy, fakes that he's skating. Boys, we have a mole on our team here, so everybody go, push-ups, whatever. And why I do that? It's because I'm not the one screaming at that guy. I'm not the bad guy, because that's easy. Oh, the coach hates me. He's always on my case. So you use the mass to do the job instead of you, and it's a lot more powerful and a lot quicker. So I'm telling you, you'll have the St. Louis and all those guys giving it to them. And it doesn't take very long, because you can't really take the power of the mass. You can't take it. You can take it against a coach, against a few individuals, but really the mass, it's too powerful for you to be indifferent to it. And then so that power will definitely help you as a coach. I also did work ethic charts before. So it has to be anonymous. The guys vote on, are guys relentless or not? Are they extremely hard workers or not? It's yes or no. You can't be in between. And then I got all the scores, and I don't show the team, but individually, they don't know who voted for who, but I've got the scores. So for instance, you've got, I talked about Thompson or Pajot. All right, now, out of 24 guys, he doesn't vote for himself, of course, so he gets 23 out of 23. Congratulations, look at that, outstanding. So you show him how recognized and how important he is in the eyes of the players, not yours, but the players. So imagine, again, power of the mass with that. Wow. So go ahead, kid. I value you. You're important. You've got it. The guys are going to follow you. You can take more leadership. Okay. Then on the other hand, you got a guy, you've been on him. Work ethic, discipline. You know he hates you. And then it's just the coach that doesn't like me. Okay. Well, then you show him the score, and he has a 2 out of 23. So you say, hey, buddy, that's not me. That's everybody telling you that everybody sees the same thing. You can't hide anymore. It's enough. Now, you either do something about it, or the next time we do that chart, you're still at the same place. But if you're still at the same place, guess what's going to happen? So in the end, I'm not the one giving it to him. Is the power of the mass has helped me show the way. Last thing, I use team stages, because now we're a team, right? So we talk about once we're going to be a team, here's what's going to happen. And there's debates about some of the order of those stages, but this is what I've experienced. This is what I feel was right for me and was true over the years. There's 4 stages, and you know they're going to happen. And I tell the players, boys, here's what's going to happen this year. We're going to live this cycle at least once, maybe twice. And if it really doesn't go that well, we might go through it 3 times, but it's okay because we can live through it and manage it. So forming stage, norming stage, storming stage, and performing stage. Why am I naming the 3 before I explain one by one? It's because the end result is a performing stage. So you create the hope right away. Hey, boys, no matter what stage is, we know the last stage is the performing stage. So it is something positive to strive to. Now, forming stage. It is the easy one. You're new. Everything's fresh. Guys are excited. You start the year. Everybody thinks they're going to get the best roles and so on. All right. So you navigate through that easy. A month and a half. Then you get to normalizing, or the norming stage, because everything normalizes itself, because now all of a sudden, okay, this guy's better than I thought. That guy's worse than I thought. That guy's got issues. All right. He doesn't have the role that he thought he'd get. So all of a sudden, for sure, you're getting guys that are happy and you get guys that are not. So guess where you're going with that? You're going into the storming stage. And that's a difficult one. But why we talk about it before the year is to show them that it's not because we're bad. It's not because that it's abnormal. It is normal. Every team will go through these stages. So expect the storming stage eventually. But also expect that the performing stage follows. So you got the hope. Now, let's talk about the tools we'll need to get through that storming stage when we get there. And what you do by doing that is you show the plan and you create calmness in front of adversity. And you know that the players know and will be able to do what they need to do to get out of it because they're ready for it, rather than being surprised and completely disarmed by it. So the 2 things that we talk about, we start the year, when the storming stage happens, and it will happen, 2 things will have to happen. We need to be together, everything together. So nobody pointing fingers publicly or closed doors. And every activity will be always together, together, together. 2, control. Knowing that we control what's happening to us. It's not just something happening. No, we know, and we're going to control, and we're going to choose 1 or 2 things that we want to make sure we control through that storming stage. And that is what's going to get us out of that storming stage. And every time it's always been the same. And you could feel the players feeling, hey, boys, remind ourselves here, we knew what's going to happen. Hey, then you got guys that remember, we're going to be together, and we're going to know we're going to manage this, knowing we can control that adversity. So just the thought and the feeling of being ready for it and knowing that you're going to get rid of it and getting through it, and there's the sun behind the clouds, and that's the performing stage, is gigantic. in how you can mobilize that group past those hard stages. So I can go on forever, but I'll just shut up and I'll let you guys get together and come up with some questions. I'm open to anything. Thank you.
All right. So you know what? We are going to, we'll go to the breakout rooms right now. We'll just do it really briefly, probably about 6 or 7 minutes. So Chris Lepro is going to get that ready for you. So just a brief introduction to those breakout rooms before you join them. Here's what we want to happen. So it's just going to be a brief introduction of yourself. Hi, I'm David Urquhart, assistant coach, San Diego Gulls. Then go around the room with each person, discussing who you are, and then take a couple of those topics. There's a lot in there, a lot of great stuff. Things that you found interesting, bring it to the group, and then we're going to come back here in about 6 minutes. People will slowly load back into the room, and we'll bring some questions back for Guy. So here we go. Chris, you can send them now to those groups. Okay, we see people filtering back in now. We have people firing back into the to the main room. Just waiting maybe about 10 more seconds while we get everyone back. It looks like everyone's coming back here. Eve,
we good?
Okay, good. So first question we got from Ken Tyler.
Oh, Ken.
Yes.
I see Wayne's there. I see Wayne's there too. Wayne. Awesome. Awesome teacher. Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
So detailed question. He says, does the planning for the season include mapping out when the critical conflict resolution stage is best to be managed in the storming stage? And if,
I've tried to do that. And
just a little bit more, just to add on here before I let you go.
Oh, go ahead.
So what tactics and strategies have you used? Also, have you been able to manage the storming stage to hit the performing stage at the right time?
Okay. So I've had all kinds of different ones, and they've happened in all kinds of different times. So I think mapping when it's going to happen is probably asking for trouble, I would say, because sometimes you everything goes so quick that you hit a storming stage close to the beginning. And sometimes you don't see it. Like I'll give you an example. Tampa, when I wasn't there, but you could see they got eliminated first round when they were, one of the best teams in the history of the league. Well, they hadn't had any storming stage until then. So they had their storming stage in the playoff. So you do want those storming stage, but you don't want to, you're not a martyr anyway. You don't want to have it at all costs at a certain moment is what I'm saying. So you can't produce it. It's going to happen. You just got to be ready to deal with it when it happens. And so the plans for me are different in the sense that besides what I said, they become very specific because you might be close to the trade deadline, which is hell to live because you're not just dealing about your team things. Guys think they can be traded and so on. So that you're gonna have to deal with it there differently than you will, let's say, in November. They're starting to talk about firing coaches. Are they talking about? So there's things that come into play that are not just the hockey part. So once you get to that storming stage, besides having your players ready for it in the sense that, hey, this is normal and we're going to stick together and all that, that's why I said we got to choose one or two things at that moment that you focus on. Just like I talked about with Bergenheim, I didn't add stuff. I took out stuff, and then we specified what to focus on and make it so clear and simple. And it's not, 3, 4, 5 different avenues, because at that point, the main thing for me is the players can't see the storm as a mountain, because you got to see it for one thing at a time. Like you hear it all the time. You can't eat an elephant all at once. It's one bite at a time. But, you'd love not to see an elephant. You see something smaller, it's a lot less discouraging. So your job for me is the projection of your storming stage is what does it feel like? What does it look like for the players? And sometimes you'll realize, oh my God, it's the end of the world, where for you it's nothing. And sometimes it's the opposite. For you it's nothing and it's the end of the world for your players. But really, what is it? Two things. That's why I say two things. I'll tell you why. Because one thing has to come from me and one thing has to come from them, because they feel involved and they feel listened to and they feel that I am taking care of what they feel is the issue. But on the other side, I have to come up with something because I have to look like I know what I'm doing. I know where to go. There's the specific thing, which is the biggest issue to take care of. And they feel I have a plan. And now we both have something that contributes to us coming out of the storming stage. So that's why I said I didn't want to get into depth before about my two things, but that's how I go about it. But the hard part is like anything, is trimming down. I'll be honest with you. This was really tough for me because I have so much to say on this subject that I could go on for hours, and just trimming it down to what you guys would like to hear or what could help you was hell for me. But it's the most important part, because I can't, if I start talking about everything, then everybody gets lost in everything. So figuring out on that storming stage, for instance, okay, guys, our back check has been our number one issue, because the players in storming stage tend to feel that everything's going wrong, or your marriage, our marriage going down the drain, like everything is wrong. Where sometimes if you just take care of one or two things, all of a sudden it'll give you the fuel to take care of everything else. So how to figure out, you have to figure that out with your staff, and you have to figure out with the players. And sometimes what's great is when you figure out that you both see the same thing. Now that's so powerful. I've had that before. So I had to change one time a D zone that we had, and I was very reluctant to do so. But I decided, you know what, guys, I hear you. I feel you. You don't feel comfortable with this, and we're going to take care of that. And I let go of my thing that I thought was the issue. And guess what happened? We got better right away. We got out of it. And I still later on took care of what I wanted to do, but in a different context where it's a lot more positive and they can take more. Here's the thing. As a coach, your job is to compensate with what's surrounding you. What I mean by that is, if your team is struggling and then you give them shit and you give it to them again and again and again, well, after a while, that's not what they need. You need to compensate. They already feel like crap. They can't go lower than that. So the more you pile on, the worse it is. So that's the time where usually I support my players the most. Where I'm at my toughest is actually when things go really well. And Scotty Bowman told me that. He did the same thing. The games that didn't mean anything, the games that you knew you were going to win, that's where he was the toughest on his players, because he knew those were the moments where they could slack off, not feel the threat, and those were the dangerous moments. But because everything is positive, they can take more. They can take you being tough. But when things go so bad for a long period of time, we tend to go to make it sink lower, and then we wonder why the team's not going anywhere. Well, it's our fault because I'm not compensating for the circumstances and how our players are feeling. So I'm at my toughest when things are going at their best, and I'm at my most supporting when things are at their worst. I don't know if that answers the question, Ken. You probably wanted something smarter, but that's all I got.
I think Ken has a bunch of follow-up questions too, but I'm sure he'll be able to get those to you at some point. Right now, I'm going to open it up to Liam Heelis, who has a question.
Awesome. Thanks for the presentation, Guy. You spoke in particular about 4 types of players: prospects, projects, stars, and the difficult athletes.
Yeah.
For us, McGill, setting up the dressing room's a real important exercise.
Yeah.
So how do you incorporate these players when organizing seats in the room?
Well, everything rises and falls on leadership. So right away, who are your leaders? What are they leaders in? And who do they relate to? So that's my number one thing. Once I've placed them in the room, then I start placing the other guys. So the second step for me is always the same. It's a mission. If I place their leader, it's because mainly he's there because there's a mission. So I put the most important mission with that particular leader at that moment. So for instance, we've got a guy that's got issues at home, and he's a quiet guy, and he hates the rah-rah kind of guy, and it disrupts him, and so on and so on. So I'll have somebody beside him that's a leader, a supporting type of leader that I'll have. Then I'll have another guy that's more lazy, that once you push him gets going. So then I'll put one of those push guys, like a pushing type of leadership, the hard-nosed guy. Somebody's got not just enthusiasm, but somebody's got torque, so that I know that that guy's going to take care of that mission. Then you'll have a rookie, for instance, maybe a little cocky one, maybe a kid that but then I might use a guy that was like him in the past, that's changed and that's developed, and so he knows that his mission towards that kid is in that avenue. And then, you know, that's what I'll do with all my leaders. So basically now you've got, you know, 6 or 7 leaders that are spread around the room in areas so that they're not too close to each other. And then you got the missions guy, and then I place the rest after. The guys that are like good members that you can never have any issues with, but that don't mingle with anybody, I'll do it on purpose. I'll throw them somewhere where you got guys that just can't stop talking. So then it forces them to get out of their comfort zone, you know, to grow and be part of the intangibles, not just be there. And then you'll get individuals, for instance, that have been cancers on the team, and those are more difficult because if you don't surround them with the right people, they're gonna affect, because if they're strong and they're alpha male personalities, oh my goodness. So I've done with some of the pro teams, I won't name guys, but I've seen them in books where you isolate some of those guys and you take care of them in a different way so that they don't affect the rest of the group. Obviously they're in the room, but hey, there's a wall in the corner. You can't affect that wall. And then you put somebody beside him that's going to be able to take it. And so that guy is basically, he's part of the intangibles, but at first you got to protect your group against those types of intangibles, and then work with them slowly over time to get them part of the positive intangibles after certain steps, so that, you know, they're not just a nuisance or they're a cancer to your team. So, you know, that's why it's not just about, okay, oh, the cancer, this is great, I'm going to put it, because I've seen some guys, some alpha males, some cancers who just took over, and I thought the leaders could take care of them. And you look at, you know, Pittsburgh's a team that, you know, Boston's another team, probably Chicago is another team where you can afford to bring in maybe one guy that's a strong personality, but also has issues and has a negative impact on other guys. Why? Because their leaders are so strong, their culture is so strong that they're able to withstand some of that. Usually you can't withstand it too many years, but you can withstand it for a small amount of time and you can manage it. So, you know, it depends on what type of team that you have. You know, I've had teams where I had, like, for instance, in Drummondville, I had, even though they were young, you had Dumont and Vachon and Levesque and those guys. They were such strong leaders. Didn't care how old they were. They didn't care. When they had something to say, they said it. When they had something to take care of, they didn't care if it was a 20-year-old, they did it. So they were so strong that other guys similar to them gravitated around them, and it became such a strong mass of individuals that the few guys that were hard to manage, I'll be honest with you, the last portion of my last year, I didn't have to do anything. But the previous year, by isolating them a little bit and taking care of it gradually, I saved those guys from, you know, the cancer guys, and we were able to save the cancer over time and manage them, and he helped us win a championship, and he went on after that. So that's why it's very different. There's no room that's the same, but I start with the leaders, then the missions, and then of course, like I said, the cancers, I know where they're going already, but then you place the other guys according to what they are and where they are in the development as a rookie, for instance, or the types of personalities, the language. Like I said, you want to spread it to grow your intangibles and to be able to evaluate them and see where they're going with time.
All right, we are at the top of the hour, so I know Pat's on the line here, who's our next presenter. Pat, we're just going to take a few more questions. Guy, if you're okay with that, take a couple more.
100%.
So we have a couple questions here. I'm gonna group them together. Wes Wolf and Chad Blundy were both asking about the sociometric profile. And is that something that profile itself, is that something you revealed to the team, or was it just that work ethic information?
No, like
if that work ethic information, has it caused any friction revealing that?
No, because that's the key. The key is it's done anonymously in terms of the guy does it. I know what he said. I've got the information, and the person that helps me figure it out and get it all together. But we're the only two that have it, and we both signed something that we don't disclose this for X amount of years, and we never do it publicly. I did it there a little bit because it's 10 years ago and it's positive, but I would never go into details about, you know, this guy being an issue, that guy, ever. I use it for my knowledge, and the GM knows which guys are important and who are not, but we never discuss with those guys what the other players are ever. But what we'll do though is, because it's a leadership thing, we'll sit down with a guy and explain to him the perception of players, for his leadership. So, you're a leader, but hey, here's how the players see you. They think you're an amazing decision leader, you're an amazing social leader, and so I'm going to use you with that. And then the answer is always, oh, really? Yeah, like you've got everybody gravitating around you and thinking that you are special for us in that respect. So it's all very positive. So I won't get into, okay, you're not this, you're not that, you're not that. We'll just get into what's positive and how we can grow it and make it better. And yeah, sometimes you'd like somebody to become somebody else, but that's going against the ocean current, and that's a huge mistake. Because yeah, you have a leader, but he's not good in this, or he's not talkative or whatever, and then you want him to improve that. But like I said, you're going to spend 80% of your time on that for him to become maybe average at it, instead of focusing on what he's great at. So what I'll do is, instead, I'll make sure that he understands what he's great at and what he can be an expert at. And then if he asks me, coach, what can I improve in my leadership? Then we'll get into that on a second and third step later. But the players never, ever, ever saw this. The arrows, the links, the bridges. It's just information for me after. I'll give you an example. I know that we have an issue with a clique of guys. I see it on my sociometry. The players are telling us, well, I'm not taking the 5 guys and going, you guys are this, you guys are guys. No, I'm taking one guy talking about spreading the wealth of our intangibles and linking them with others. And that's where the room comes into play. And then team building, I'll make sure that guy is not with those 3 guys, and so on and so on. So it's information for me to be able to manage, knowing what I have to attack, what I got to keep, and what I got to grow, and what I got to get rid of. So definitely not something you want to show the players. I mean, you've heard some issues of guys, going to players and say, hey, you can't say this, you can't say like that. I never gotten into that. So those tools have stayed very pure and useful for me, and non-threatening.
Okay, building off that, we have another question here. This one's from JF Best. In reference to problem players, outside of digging and doing your research on the player's background, how much do you lean on the top tier players? Can you give examples on how you've guided the top tier guys to help those problem players get back into the fold?
Yeah, but like I said, if you ask them to help that guy right off the bat without knowing what the guy needs help in, then you might even be creating a bigger problem. Because very often those guys, they don't want help. Like, they need help, but they don't want help. Why? It's because they, like I said before, they've built such a wall that very few people can get through it. And there's a very particular way to get through it. That's why I say you got to dig and break the wall and get rid of the emotion before you can get to the reasoning. I mean, whether you're a psychologist, or they'll tell you that. And I'll give you an example. I won't say the name because it's a big name. I couldn't talk to that guy, even though he was an alpha male. He was a top. I couldn't talk to this guy about what I wanted to talk about for about 20 minutes. I had to dance around for 20 minutes, talk about everything else but what I needed to get to, so that I would get to his reasoning, and I would get to him actually being open and having the rationale to deal with what we were going to talk about. So he'd be there on his chair, jittering, and then you could see his leg moving and his hands, and you could see his shoulders are basically in attack mode, because he's sitting in the coach's office and he's just waiting for me to give it to him, or to deal with something touchy. And he's in attack mode, but you haven't done anything. So the key was with this guy is sit back. I'd go back on my chair, and I did it on purpose to look all relaxed, and then talk. Okay, how's your wife? And hey, did you bring the guys play golf lately? And then I talk about anything but what I needed to talk about. And after a while, when I saw slowly shoulders getting back, going down, him relaxing, all the signs of somebody that's not in attack mode and not in an emotional state, that's what I would start talking about, what I needed to get to, especially if it was touchy, or it had to do with him personally, or how he was, or how it was difficult for everybody around him to deal with him, and so on and so on. So that approach for me is really important. And I'm the same. Like, You know, if my wife tries to tell me something, no matter how smart it is, no matter how important it is, if I'm in attack mode, I'm barking back in a fraction of a second. And so somebody around me, like Marty Raymond, you know, he's amazing. He knows how to deal with me, and we don't even need to talk. He knows when to get me, when to say something, when not, when to piss me off, when to get me go. I mean, it's been 30 years, and so you need that around you. So that guy needed my type of personality to deal with him because I knew how to deal with it. Some other guys, it's more difficult because you try to get to them. Like, for instance, like there's different types of people. And, you know, I've heard all kinds, but for me, there's 3 types that I constantly saw. There's the emotional person, there's a task-oriented person, but there's also one that I figured out over time is the image person. The guy that doesn't respond to emotion, gets lost in the emotion. It gets lost in the task. You ask him to do things, and when it's time to do it, he can't do it. He can't compute, doesn't remember it. And so without naming guys, top end guy, I couldn't get to him. What's wrong? Like I get the emotion going and no good. I get the task going. I'd sit down, and eventually I found out some guys are neither or, and they're image oriented. They're people where you give them an image on the video, you give them a picture, you give them an image in their minds, and all of a sudden they click. And I've seen many now because now I'm able to recognize them. And before I wasn't, because I was working on the other ways to deal with somebody, thinking I'm going to get them one way or the other. But those image people, they're actually the simplest, but they're the toughest to figure out, because by the time you figure it out, you've tried many emotional stuff and task-oriented stuff. So that image for me is you got to find personal things that they can relate to. For example, let's say you're talking about, okay, somebody's having difficulty with his wife and his couple, and the guy's trying all kinds of things. And well, if you relate to me, you know, I don't play golf. So if you talk to me about a golf thing, I'm not going to relate to that. But if you talk about fishing, talk about fly fishing, salmon, now we're talking. So let's say your wife is shut, she doesn't want to talk to you, and you've tried everything. Well, maybe an image like fly fishing the salmon makes sense for me, because I understand that if you pull right away the salmon, that's it. The string is gone, and the salmon's gone, and you want it to pull it right away. You have to let it go, even though you think it's leaving, even though you think you've lost it. You got to let it go and start reeling only when you feel the salmon is getting tired and is giving you some loose. Then you start reeling, and then you feel the resistance again. Let it go, because if you pull at that moment, you're going to break the string. So I'm just giving you an example of an image that you can use with somebody that will trigger a response right away. For instance, Crosby. Sidney was very emotional when we talked about refs or we were losing and guys weren't working hard. Like, he'd go nuts. It was hard to get to him at those moments. But I found talking with him that the thing he hated the most was losing time, wasting time. And so in games, you talk about anything, and if he'd be fired up, forget it. But then I'd go to him and said, losing time? And then you could see him, and he'd want to respond, but right away it would get to him, because it was a key words that were personal, that were specific. Hey, Wayne, that's your teaching right there. That's my master's right there. See, I didn't forget. Wayne Allowell was listening to us there, was my teacher. But anyways, so those keywords are huge, but they're specific, and then you're able to deal with those individuals because of those images that you create with those keywords.
All right, Guy, I think that's fantastic. On that note, we're going to bring it to a close for that session. And I think I speak for everybody watching there. We all learned a lot. That was fantastic. We'd like to thank you. And then just to keep things going here, we're going to bring on Patrick Delisle-Houde. So Patrick is going to be our next speaker. So he's the current strength and conditioning coordinator for the Montreal Canadiens. Before joining the Habs, Pat spent 4 years in the QMJHL, splitting his time between the Rimouski Oceanic and Moncton Wildcats. He then spent 5 years playing at McGill, including 2 years as the captain, while completing his master's degree in sport and exercise physiology. And at that point, I was lucky enough, I was able to coach Pat for a couple of years, and got to say he's one of the most ferocious players and one of the best net front presence I've ever seen. But Pat has published several papers in sports and exercise physiology. And today he's going to be presenting on behind the scenes of athlete development. Here's Pat. I'm just going to unmute you here, Pat.
You hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Eric. Thanks for the kind words. First, I would like to thank everybody for being here because it's something very important for me. Kelly's been a big part of my life. He coached me during 5 years at McGill, and he's been a big influence on who I've become. And it is very important for me to do this today. And you're going to see, I'm going to try to relate to Kelly a few times with a few stories. When we're talking about the behind the scene of an athlete development, the first word that comes to mind for me, it's adaptability. Adaptability, it's in the room at McGill. It's a quote that has been used by the coaches there for a while, and I feel the best way to describe it is probably a theory of evolution by Charles Darwin, which basically says that it's not necessarily because you're super smart or you're the strongest that you're going to survive, but it's the way that you're going to adapt to, like, everything is changing around you to make it the best of yourself. During this presentation, we're going to try to go over a few points. We're going to talk about the physical adaptation of an athlete, the adaptation as a coach within the social context, and the adaptation to your environment as a coach, to always in the purpose of making the athlete grow and getting better. First of all, I would like to talk about a little theory between the hardware and the software. What I mean by that, the hardware is your body, is like how we define you. The software is how you learn stuff, like your brain, how you're going to process information. Over the years, a few articles, a lot of research been done. Is it innate or it's learned? What do you need to be a best hockey player? Do you need to, are you born with that talent, or you're going to learn how to play hockey? Well, from the latest research, we've been shown that your genes are going to define both. However, those genes are going to define the potential. They're going to set limit. But those can be pushed, and also they're going to tell you how you respond to a certain stress or to a certain stimulus. So the most important part in athlete development is the stress and the stimulus that is being imposed on the athlete. That's what's going to make the changes. That's how it's going to define the athlete on the long-term development. And we all know that developing an athlete is a very long road, and it's not straight. It's going in every direction. And as a coach, as a strength coach, as a coach on the ice, as a sports psychologist in different domain, as we need to provide the tool to our athlete, provide the tool to our hockey player, and not necessarily remove the obstacle. But as I was listening yesterday to Dan Gould, a very a well-known sports psychologist, he was talking about the little victory that you need to create. Well, those little victories are going to be the building blocks or the foundation for our athlete. That's I thought that was a great way to thinking about it. And what we see often in the development, in the hockey world, in the hockey sphere, it's the game. We see the game. We see how the coach are reacting behind the bench, how the players are acting on the ice. We see the highlights on TV. We see the comments on social media. That's what most people are going to see. But there's a big difference of what we're seeing and what's happening in the back. What's happening in the back, it's the work in the gym, the individual work on the ice after practice, the relationship of the players with their coaches, with their strength coaches, with their physiotherapists, with the work that they're doing in the clinic. And all this work, it's going to have a huge impact on how the athlete is developing over time. First of all, we're going to start by physical adaptation of the athlete. And when I'm talking about physical adaptation, I'm not talking about lifting weights. I'm not talking about necessarily resistance training, running, or biking. What I'm talking about is teaching your body to tell your mind what to do. That's neurophysiology. How the body is going to it's going to react to a desired action, without referring necessarily to your mind. The athlete is going to adapt his action to a bunch of different situations. That's the main goal of the physical adaptation, not necessarily getting bigger muscle or having a VO2 max, but it's how you're going to be able to react to a situation on the ice with the proper strength, with the proper technique to make it the best performance. For that, you need to keep your stress need to be as specific as possible, but I'm going to say later on why it needs to be as general as you can. First of all, if we start with a little example, here on the picture, we can see David Rose. Very common situation in a hockey game. Rosie that I played with for about 4 years, trying to get the position before getting the puck, the position before the possession, like often hockey coaches are saying. Well, for this, you need to know the technique, how to position your body, how your legs need to be planked on the ice to produce force to being able to get this position. When are you going to use this as an individual technique, tactic, but when is going to fit as well in the team tactic? It can be, let's say, during a circle, cycling the puck down the ice, in offensive zone, in a bunch of different situations, and how that's going to affect your performance. Well, if we take all of that and we go on the back end side of it, well, what's the biomechanic foundation of your technique? Well, let's say as an example, what is the range of motion that you need to generate at your ankle? What is the range of motion you need at your knee? What is the range of motion at your hips? That's what has been circled in the image. That's what we're going to be focusing on. What you need to perform that technique. Then after that, transferring to your individual tactic, what are the strength demands? Do you need a isometric strength? Do you need a concentric strength? Do you need an eccentric strength? Well, just to plank that foot right now, you need a humongous isometric strength, but at some point, you're going to need to get out of this position. That's where the concentric strength is going to come in place. However, when you think about it, this sequence is not played by itself. It's played in a game, in a team tactic, in a performance. While you're going to have physiological demands, your body is going to be tired. You're going to have an opponent on your back, and you're going to try to push. Those are all details that you need to take into consideration for your athlete development, for improving your player. While this can be done off the ice, this can also be done on the ice. If you think about off the ice, very simple. Those are, if you start on the left, picture the left wall, and then I circle the leg. Well, you respect all the angle at your hip, knees, and ankle. Those are developing a strength, but you're on two legs. If we remember the picture from Rosie, it was a split stance. Can we reproduce this same formation? Yes, in the second image to your left. If you go to the third image, where I'm single leg, well, you start developing some eccentric strength and some isometric strength for producing this plank foot, this foot that you're placing in front of your opponent to getting the position. Then after that, we're talking about the connection between your body and your mind, and not having to think about what you're doing, thinking about like the strength that you're going to push in, thinking about the technique. While we're starting introducing different stimulus on the fourth image, completely to your right. Well, you can see that like the athlete is doing different movement on the other limb. At the trunk, you need some stabilization. That's how we're starting to introduce the mind and the body together. Then after that, we start talking about physical demand. Well, if you look at the image, like the bottom image, you can see a very like too explosive one, being able to be explosive and getting out of this position, then repeat, being able to do it under fatigue, under certain weights being applied on you in different situations. That's how you're going to be able to improve your athlete and improve a little part of the technique to fit in later on in a individual tactic, in a team tactics, and later on in a performance in a game. This is in the gym, but this can also be done as well on the ice. A very example during return to play protocol, very simple exercise. Is my athlete able to stabilize his front leg while he's pushing with the other one? Is he shaky or is like stable and he's able to generate this isometric strength that we were talking about earlier? However, we're saying like, well, he's a little bit angled, he's leaning towards his opponent to protect the room in front of him. Well, just working on the outside edge represent exactly the same movement on the leg. If you go a little bit further into the movement, just tight turn. Tight turn is going to represent exactly the same biomechanic foundation, the same strength demands. Then later on, you're going to be able to push it into small game area, game situation where the physiological demand is going to be exactly the same as a hockey game or similar to it. This is a way to apply. This is a way of thinking about it. However, this is not necessarily like the way of doing it, like Guy Boucher was saying. It's just a way of thinking out of the box, thinking about like a movement, dissecting this movement, and applying it to a context. As we can see, let's say in the next slide, well, you need to transfer and adapt your situation. You can transfer and adapt with your athlete working with sports, working, let's say, with spike ball here. Well, if we look at the circle on the image, it's still the same angle. It's still the same absorption of the weight before transferring and taking the position and hitting the ball that he's going to need to do to his left. That's why we're saying that like a stress can be really specific, can be really focused on one aspect, but needs to be general to keep working on other different aspects. Just playing spike ball is going to work on your hand-eye coordination. It's going to start improving your communication, and this can be done in a very different situation. Often when we think about it, like we imagine, let's say, a defenseman and a forward. Defenseman need to judge the gap. Well, if you play spike ball, he's going to have to see this perception. He's going to learn the perception of the ball, the perception of his other player. That's another aspect that can be improved by transferring and adapting to the situation that you have in front of you. That's the physical adaptation. However, as a coach, as a strength coach, as any type of player development, you're going to have a huge impact into the social context, how you can adapt yourself within the social context, because this is a huge part of it when you think about it. The first question that you need to ask yourself, which all our presenters have talked about, is like, what type of group of you have in front of you? And I'm going to simplify it even more. What's the size of group? Sometimes you're going to be working in large group in the gym. Sometimes you're going to be working in small group on the ice. You need to know, you need to adapt your way of teaching with the size. The same thing, you need to know your player. Who is my leader? Who's going to bring me up and who's going to bring me down? Who's our positive? Who's our negative? Also, you need to know what is the goal. What is the goal for your team? And what is the goal for the individual? Because if you forget the team aspect, well, you're not working in a team setting anymore. But if you forget about the individual, as Guy just said, you're not going to bring him anymore into your pattern, into your system, which is the most important part at the end. You're not going to develop this athlete as an individual in the best interest of the team at the end. Also, what are the group quality? What are the group quality like? Are they on time? Are they very attentive, or are they like always distracted by something? Do you have to, let's say on the ice, do you have to not allow any parents in the stands, or in the gym, do you have to shut off the TV? Those are all aspects that you need to take into consideration, because the context is how we progress. And it was true for Peter Smith yesterday when he was talking about the context was the way of building a culture. Well, the context is the way to build your athlete. You need to know the athlete physically, because he's going to respond to different stimulus, but you need to know him as well socially, so you can adapt your way of teaching, your way of training him to the individual. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the individualization, because this is a huge term right now in most sports, I would say, and also in businesses and a bunch of different spheres in the society right now, because everybody, we know, we've been aware, the literature has been saying that everybody responds differently to a stimulus. So we need to individualize stuff. However, we're here in hockey, we're working into a team context. How can we implement the individual plan without confusing it as in isolation, without isolating the player, without putting him into a little box? Well, there's two ways. I see that as two different ways. Like there's the plan integration and there's the individual work. A plan integration can be very simple. As an example, let's say when we come in the morning in the gym, the guys have to show up for about 9:15. Let's say I have a window of 9:15 to 10 o'clock, because 10 o'clock is the meeting. Well, during those 45 minutes, I have to get in 22 players, 23 players with a bunch of different plan, bunch of different quality that they need to improve. They might be working on different part of their continuum. They might be working on their speed. They might be working on their power or their strength. But I need to feed those into one session. So they all have their individual plan, but they're going to have common exercise, common goals as a team. Then they're going to have their secondary or the accessory exercise for them individually. This way, they're still creating a team culture, but they're still working and they're still applying a stimulus for them to be working on their KPI, on their key performance indicator that they need to improve. As if you compare it to an individual work, well, that's more easy. Let's say if I give you an example, if I work with a Finnish player, they got sisu. Most of them got sisu. They're intrinsically motivated. They have this determination that comes from the inside. But for me as a strength coach or any type of coach, I think it is important to take into consideration the physical aspect or physical aspect of the player to apply the right stimulus, but you need to take into consideration the psychological aspect. So what motivates the player? How can you bring him into a state where he's going to best respond? Finnish players are super intrinsically motivated. They're going to want to apply the best stimulus. They're going to work very hard, but I need to get even more inside of them. I'm going to give you an example. Let's say, have they got into the army? Have they participated into army? Over there, they got service. It is something that I can get to use them to make them tick. It's the same thing as being on the ice, but that's behind the scene, and that's how we get the most out of them into a continual basis every day. Every day, I need to know them a little bit more to make them tick a little bit more. Next one is the adaptation to your environment. Adaptation to your environment as a coach, because to provide the best service, to provide the best care to your athlete, you need to be able to adapt yourself to what's surrounding you. The first aspect that I would like to talk about is the physical environment. By physical environment, I mean like everything that is like hard surrounding you. Let's say if you compare the on ice to the off ice, is my teaching style is going to be the same as if I'm on the ice with 3 player, as if I'm off the ice with 25 player. That's something that's going to change. And a good example that I have here is from Kelly. I remember a few years ago, I think Eric was actually there, or I think you were there, Eric. We were in New Brunswick. New Brunswick, we're getting there pretty early. We're there a little bit too early, I would say, probably, for what most players will have said at this point. But Kelly had in mind to bring us behind the rink on the soccer field. It was exhibition game. Who cares about the score at the end? But it bring us behind the rink on the soccer field, and he wants to work on our back checking, how we're going to position when we're back checking. Well, that's well adapted, because when you're on the grass, you need to run. So it gives us a lot more time to think about the situation and to think about like where we need to position, and it gives him a lot more time to get some feedback, to give some feedback to the player while they're running. So it was a way to adapt without having being on the ice, a better way for him to teach us a team tactic. Another example would be, well, another point would be either home and away. When you're fortunate enough that you have a home ice, let's say major AAA or junior major, university, pro hockey, well, it's easier a little bit because you have your own setup. If you're minor hockey, most of the time it's always like being away. Like you're moving from one rink to the other, so you're gonna need to adapt even more. But let's say as an example, off the ice when you're away. Well, as a coach, you're gonna have to set up the video room. Well, am I setting up in a way that every player can be well seated, that they can see the screen, and then when I'm gonna be talking, I'm not gonna be in the middle of 3 players hiding the screen from them. Those are all aspects that you need to adapt yourself for a better learning of your player, a better development of your player. Another great example would be, that's something that I notice more because of the job that I'm doing, but am I going into the rink and noticing an area for them to stretch at the beginning? This is part of their development. And if I don't pay attention to it, well, I'm missing a part of their game preparation, and that's gonna impair their game performance. those are all little aspects that as a coach, as a strength coach, I need to adapt to my environment to give my best performance for the athlete development. Another aspect that I wanted to talk about is the social environment. As a coach, you're gonna have to deal with a staff. The staff is very large, and depending on like what level you are, it's gonna impact. Sometimes it's gonna be a little easier, little staff, and like you know each other, but sometimes it's gonna be very wide. If I talk about like where I'm at right now, well, we have a strength coach, we have a director of sports performance, we have a physio, 2 athletic therapists, we have 5 coaches, 1 goalie coaches, 2 video coaches. You need to determine for your field, for your little part that you're taking care of, you need to determine everyone's strength. Because by maximizing their knowledge or their strength, you're going to be able to improve yourself. You're going to be able to improve your service that you're giving into the player for the athlete development. And by improving your service, you're hoping to improve your player. By improving your player, you're hoping to improve the team, and at the end, improve the game performance. 2 quick example. Let's say, for me, when I do a return to play protocol, well, I'm gonna have the player in the gym. At some point, I'm gonna go on the ice with him. And let's say we all know that like a few years ago, Shea Weber, not a few years ago, actually 2 years ago, Shea Weber came back on the ice after like 10 months of being away. Well, if I think about it, I look at my staff, who knows him the best? Who's going to know his strength, his weaknesses? Well, the D coach, Luke Richardson, is going to be a great resource for me. So I went to see Luke. And ask him about like what he was expecting from Shea as he get back. What's his strength? What he needs to work on? What do you want me to focus on? And let's be honest, he probably had 1,000 more drills than I have. So I went to see him and asked him a bunch of drills that he wanted me to incorporate into my return to play protocol. That gave me drills where I could focus on little technique, on little point that he needed to have some checks marked to being able to come back. That's just a little example. Another good example, if we think about Kelly again, I was just thinking about that a few weeks ago, actually, or when Herc called me. Kelly's graduated from a master in exercise physiology and had a certain way of coaching and a certain way of thinking about things. Well, Kelly's last 2 coaches I coached with him was Liam Ellis and Dave Requart, both as master but in sports psychology. So he was able to surrounding him, not necessarily with the best of the best, but with great people that think in a different way, that was bringing a different opinion. And that's how he was maximizing their strength and their knowledge to improve the development of this player and later on improve their game performance. This is just like a few sphere of like the player development, but those are like fun area that I want to make you think about outside of the box, because you need to like apply your own sauce to it, and you need to apply your own knowledge to it to make the best out of it for your players. Thank you. Eric, do you want to?
Yep, I'll jump in
get
here.
back in.
Yeah, thank you, Pat. That was great, and I think it gives us a good idea of what's going on behind those scenes of athlete development. You know, you're receiving these players. When you receive players, you get them from drafts, trades, and it's, you know, what are you doing with them? So, and how do you assess what you get how do you assess their training age and their level of strength when you get them? It's interesting to hear these things. So what we'll do now is we'll get back into those breakout rooms for another 5 to 10 minutes. So as I'm speaking here, Chris LaPearl will throw you in there. As you're getting back in here, just a reminder, you can text me in the chat your questions for Pat. So now we'll get to some Q&A. So Pat, you ready to go here? I'll take you off mute. So Pat, first question comes from Franco Giuliano, and he says, do you believe the concept of load management is applicable to the NHL And if so, will it ever become a mainstream idea? Why or why not?
I think it will become a mainstream idea. I think it is applicable. However, not the way we're seeing it right now. If you look at most of the literature that you're seeing it right now, has been produced by rugby, Australian football, all that stuff. So it's not really applicable the way they're thinking about it for a sport like hockey, where you play every second day in the NHL. However, it is applicable in a way that if you're managing the load, every coaches are managing the load in a certain way, but they're doing it with their own knowledge. What Franco is talking about is like, how can you push this knowledge outside of our common thought? So how can we bring the technology? Because I know Franco is a big technology guy. How can you bring that technology to help the coaches understand what the strength coach is trying to talk about? Because if you don't explain what you're talking about and you just put out those numbers, well, you're not helping yourself, you're not helping the coach, and you're not helping your players, because you're not providing the right information to the coaches, who are the end point of decision.
So then, just adding on to that, Pat. So this one's from Chad Blundy, and talking about the saying that rest is a weapon, and it's something that you hear more and more in recent years. And just, can you suggest any quantitative measures or specific observations to look for when trying to evaluate whether an individual player or team as a whole might be experiencing fatigue and need to have more rest worked into their schedule?
Well, there's a few ways of doing it. Like obviously you can use technology, you can use heart rate variability, you can use force plate. That's all very nice, but most people don't have access to those things. Discussion with the athlete is a great way. Like, I'm validating what I get on my force plate by talking to the athlete. If the athlete's feeling great and my force plate are telling me the opposite, maybe I'm gonna have to redo those, because maybe those are not well indicator. So just talking with the athlete is a great way of doing it. But like, the best way is to mix both. Mix the numbers, let's say mix the number of load management and recovery with the subjective aspect of your gut feeling from the coach and the subjective aspect of what the players are telling you. They're the best. They know their self the best, and they're the one that have the most experience with their body. After that, you need to know who you need to trust, because some players are going to try to get day off when they don't need day off, but there's always players that you can trust, and they're going to tell you the truth about how the team is feeling, how they're feeling personally.
So just to follow up on that, so for example, for someone like a minor hockey coach, would something like a scale of saying, okay, how do you feel on 1 to 10, asking your players that as they come in, is that something you'd recommend using at that level, or do you think it should be reserved for more for as you get to the higher levels?
I would say for lower level, we're talking about kids. Don't even think about that. Just make them have fun. But for like, let's say in between, we're talking about like 14 to like 18 years old, like a little bit more competitive. I would say a great way of doing it would be to keep the number of minutes that you're on the ice, because that's where you get the most load. That's where you get the most like stress on your body. Then ask their player how they're feeling after that practice. Multiply both of them. That gives you a load measurement. Then after that, like you said, or before the next practice, ask them how they're feeling on 10. That's a great way of doing it. Then with both, you can get like an objective measure, then a subjective measure that they're giving you right after, like the next time. So you can like superpose it, both things, and you don't just have like a subjective measure, but you have both an objective and subjective, which give you not the truth, but a better picture of how they're feeling.
Okay, so now we have a question from Mark from one of the breakout rooms, and it's, how do you create the synergy of communication between strength coach and head coach, and how important is it, that communication to the athletes?
It's a great question. The communication is super important, because if I don't know what the coach is expecting from the player, how can I kind of guide him towards playing this way? Guy was giving it a very good example, as when he was talking about the expectation. Well, as a strength coach, I need to know the expectation towards a player as well. That's going to give me a great idea to know like if the coach think a player is too slow, if he thinks he's a little bit too like got a little bit too much weight on him, maybe he wants him to gain a little bit more weight. And that's a full circle. Those expectations needs to be shared with the players, from the coach, and from the strength coach. So that's not just the job of the coach of telling the player he needs to be faster. Well, that's the job of the strength coach to know it and to tell him as well. So the full circle is just keeping going, and that's like, I could call that the circle of athlete development, because if you're missing a step in the circle, well, you're missing a link.
Okay, good. And then, so just adding on to that a little bit, talking about working together with the coaching staff, and now this might tie in if you have some sports psychologists on board as well. But the question comes from Carrie Kettle relating to developing players' mental adaptability. And is there anything you do to take players out of their comfort zone? So maybe speak to that question directly, and then also maybe how you use the coaching staff and how you work together to do that.
Yes, I do bring players outside of their comfort zone, because most hockey players, they're competitive. They want to be challenged. And if it's too easy for them, they're not going to like it, or they're going to get disinterest and they're going to start looking somewhere else. You want to keep them on their toes. So yes, I'm going to bring outside of their comfort zone. It can be with a workout. It can be with one exercise that they're not used to do, and it's going to throw them off their chair. It can be on the ice, when I'm going to personally challenge them to do things through competitive challenge. If can I beat you on the ice? That's pretty of like, NHL players don't like to be beat that in any sphere of the way. So how can I do that myself on the ice or off the ice? Then how do I include my staff? Well, I would say that there's not only the players that talk to our sports psychologists. I spend, every time he's in Montreal, I probably spend 30 minutes every day just talking, not shooting the shit, but just talking with the sports psych about the players, like what he's thinking about things. And this makes a full circle again within the staff. Like we're gonna go for dinner with the physiotherapist. We're gonna go with dinner with the coaches, and we're gonna not just chat about players, but there's always gonna be a part of you who's going to ask some question, because you're so passionate about it that you want the best for them, that you're going to get out a little question here and there from do you want to know more? Because we all know different experience. We all experiment different things with the players in our sphere, that if we can share, we can bring out the little thing that's going to make them tick, that's going to bring them outside the comfort zone, and that's going to help them improve at their best.
All right, so the next question, changing gears a little bit. This one comes from Wes Wolf, and he coaches in major junior. And the question is, our athletes' regular routines have been totally disrupted, talking about in the current time, and to the point where he's seeing the biggest disruption in their sleep and hygiene. So at what point would it be reasonable to implement some regulation during an off season or a time like this?
At what point? I would say right now. An athlete development doesn't an athlete day is not 3 hours at the rink, or it's not 12 months. It's not 6 months a year. If you want to get the best out of your player, that's 12 months. Obviously they're going to be off, but it's 12 months, 24 hours. So you can implement this little routine that you should implement a little routine into your players. And that's very easy, because right now they have all excuses. Everything is because of the pandemic. But in reality, for those players, there's not a big difference. You want to make them work out. Well, what you find in the gym is weights, barbell, and steps. That's common to every gym. Well, you have books that you can put into a bag, a school bag or a grocery bag, to create your weights. You have a hockey stick or a broom that you can use as a very easy barbell. You can have step up. You can use a chair. You can use stairs. So those are all things that you're gonna be able to transfer into their life right now that are very easy. Then after that, the sleep routine you were talking about. Well, give them assignment. Don't be afraid to challenge them on things. That we're just talking about challenge. Well, don't be afraid to, let's say, tell them that they need to listen to some things, or to ask them to send you their hours of sleep. Usually they're going to be not always honest. They're going to cheat a little bit, but it's going to make them realize that they needed that and that you care about this aspect in their life. And if you care about this aspect in their life, well, it probably means it is important for them and for their development.
Okay, we still have a couple more questions to get to here, Pat. So again, switching gears, you mentioned the Finns and their sisu. What are your thoughts on sauna use? So this question is coming from Casey Cook. And then maybe addition into that, maybe you can talk a little bit about active recovery on top of sauna use.
Can you repeat the word? Sorry.
So what you talked about the Finns and their sisu.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on using a sauna?
Oh, sauna is great. You know why? It makes you feel good. If you feel good, you play good. But if sauna makes a big difference into your recovery, literature is very debatable. So it's going to depend on your belief. So I'm not going to say it's better for you or not, because some studies are going to say yes, some studies are going to say no, and nothing is really confirmed. In terms of recovery strategy, your best recovery strategy is exactly what Wes Wolf said. It's sleep, hydration, feeding. Those are your 3 best recovery strategy you can have for a hockey player. Then after that, you got the fancy stuff, the recovery boots, the foam roller, the vibrating foam roller. That's all add-on that the player is going to feel better afterwards. But sleep, hydration, and nutrition is going to be your 3 best friend through your athlete development.
Okay, I think we have time probably for one more here. This one's coming from Joe, and he asks, who is the most competitive player that you've ever dealt with? And maybe give some examples of what made them, examples of them being competitive and how, and from what you've seen.
The most competitive player that I've seen. That's a very good question. I would the answer is not Penny. I would say that usually a guy like Thomas Plekanec was a terrific competitor. 34 years old, was the first one in the gym the day after he got eliminated. Always texts me about, like, we're starting in 2 weeks. We're getting ready for next season. He had his objective in mind. Every morning he was showing up at 9 in the morning, first one in the gym, last one to get out. His work ethic was amazing, and that's probably why he stayed so long in the league. And he will say the same thing for himself. And it's the same thing on the ice. I had the chance to coach him a few times on the ice during practice, during the off season, or during like the season, like with little groups. And you cannot beat him. If you beat him, he's going to try to beat you again. He's going to say, we're going back. And I think that's a quality that most of the biggest competitors have inside of them. And I'm sure Martin could say the same thing. The best player doesn't accept to be beat. If you accept to be beat, well, you lost already.
That's great, Pat. And I think that's a great point to end on as well for your presentation. I'd like to thank you, and also like to thank you for being accommodating and allowing us to cut into a little bit of the start of your time. We did have one more question about your favorite books, and then I'm going to share that in the chat group because I had asked Pat before as well as Marty. So I'll share that in the main chat, and just like to thank you again, Pat. Great presentation. So moving on to our final presenter of the seminar, and former coach of mine. He's a coaching mentor to me. And when I think of him as a teacher and as a leader. It's Martin Raymond. I go by Marty. So Marty is the current assistant GM of the Gatineau Olympiques. His coaching experience includes stints as assistant coach for the Tampa Bay Lightning, Ottawa Senators, Hamilton Bulldogs, in addition to time spent as head coach of the Drummondville Voltigeurs. Internationally, Martin has worked with Hockey Canada on the coaching staff for gold medal teams at the U20 and U18 championships. Notably, Marty guided the McGill hockey program as a head coach from 1995 to 2009, leading the team to the Queen's Cup championship in 2008. He holds a bachelor degree of education, physical education, as well as a master's in sports psychology from McGill. And today he's going to be presenting on facing adversity in the media, lessons learned. All yours, Marty. Did we lose Marty there?
There you go.
There we go.
Thanks, Dave. Listening to you here about 2008 Queen's Cup. Erks was our captain, so nice memories to rekindle there with you mentioning that in your when we won it in your hometown in St. or close to your hometown, St. Catharines there. So it's nice memories. Thank you for inviting me, Erks. Very happy to be here. Always fun to participate in those kinds of conferences. Lots of passionate people who are interested in developing and learning and exchanging ideas and knowledge. So I'm excited to be here. Secondly, it's interesting for me to be here because of the fact that the topic is a very sensitive one, the most sensitive I've given as a presenter in 25 years. So looking forward to that. I had the run through this morning in French, so if I slip a few French words in today, don't hold me to that. But most importantly, and I'll share my screen right away, is we're all here for a great cause, and I want to make sure that we are reminded of that. Is we all care for the people that are here on the screen, and we have Kelly's family to the left, and so Michelle, his wife, and his kids there with Jetlyn and Darcy and Bodie and Wesley, and on the other side we've got Martin Routhier's family with Louis Felix and Livia and his wife Anne Marie. So I want to thank everybody for being here on this virtual conference here to in honor and to support these very important people to all of us, and thank you for doing that. And Friends of McGill Hockey thanks you for it. And even if you are not a player that played for McGill Hockey, whether men's or women's, you are still a Friends of McGill Hockey by participating this week into this seminar. So today my topic, as you know, is facing adversity in the media. The lessons that I learned, I spoke to a lot of people about it. I don't want to talk only about what happened to me, and I'll explain for those that may not know what I'm talking about when I said what happened in my case. But I want to make sure that we generalize everything and then we look at what are the situations that may arrive and how we can deal with that. So I'll start with this slide here, and let's keep in mind that any media incident, especially in social media now, is about maybe a player of yours, or if you're a business owner, maybe one of your employees, it may be a group of your players. That's what happened with us in Ottawa, where for those who don't know, some guys were in a cab one night on the road, and they got caught on film by the cab driver that they were complaining about my coaching. And so it went public, and then we had to get into survival mode for a couple hours, if not a couple of days, to make sure that we kept moving forward as a group, and that nobody got really hurt from it. So keep in mind that not only can it happen to a player, like in the NHL recently, with a player that thought he was doing a private messaging on social media, which we all know now is there's nothing private on social media. Even if you think you are on a private platform, you're not. Anybody can show it at any time, so you got to be aware of that. It could be a staff member of yours if you're the boss of your business. It could be a colleague of yours. So what do you do when that happens? How can you help, etc.? And obviously it can happen to yourself. And so there are steps that you can look at. There are plans to put in place so that you're prepared if it does happen. And because we don't control everything, and especially the more social media platforms, the less we control. So I spoke to a lot of people about this. A lot of them were PRs in the National Hockey League, but I'm not going to talk only about what you do if it happens in the NHL level. I think you have to think about the fact that we might have some minor hockey coaches here over here. on this call, and other businesses. So let's keep that in mind. But one thing that one of the PR representative from an NHL team told me is that the best way to prepare now with the media, the way it works, and how surrounded we are by it, is to imagine the most improbable, embarrassing, and difficult scenario you can never think would happen, and then you got to plan for it. So you might have to use a little imagination, but we know a lot of stuff that has happened to coaches recently, of things they had said and were told 5 years ago they couldn't even remember. It could be anything. So we got to be aware that it's part of it. It could be a Facebook thing with one of your students at school, anything. Well, I like the quote here where Tony Robbins is a good salesman, but he also sometimes has really good insight on mindset. And I like this one where he says that life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. And so when things happen, you know, some people would say they happen for a reason. One thing's for sure is you can be better, you know, once you go through your adversity at any level, especially on the media side, on the public side. So a little bit of a crisis plan, and keeping in mind that with all the plans that you're going to make, that you're going to prepare beforehand, before a season or before a fiscal year, whatever, that, you know, no battle plan will resist contact with the enemy. And, you know, like obviously once there is contact, you got to adjust. I think Pat's alluded to that in his conference there. But I quoted this Prussian military commander from the 19th century because it's still, I think it's still of circumstances for what we face here in 2020. So I'm going to go through some of the steps, and some of them will be personal in terms of how I went through it. And so the first step is when you prepare a plan for what do we do if our bantam team winds up getting caught doing something on a media platform that we didn't want that to come out, and now we got to react to it. The first thing is you might feel that it's personal. In my case, it definitely was, because it was direct disrespect to me. But I mean, even if it would have been a colleague, or if it would have been one of our players caught, you feel you're probably going to feel for them. You're going to have some emotions that are going to come up, you know, most likely negative feelings, and so you got to be prepared for that. In my case, personally, I was lucky because our support staff was very supportive. No pun intended there, but Guy was not only one of my best friends, but also our head coach. So he was right there with me on that, and supported me throughout. You know, we'll talk about that later, but obviously he was one of the chosen to speak about it in his role with the media every day, and really supported me very well there. But the rest of the staff was good too, and they knew how I was feeling. They had a pretty good idea, and you know, they brought me back in line, you know, for the first couple of hours where, you know, you're kind of wondering, well, geez, do I really need this? You know, like where do we go from there? So the other point, number 2, is call on mentors, and I think that's important. And speaking of the Friends of McGill hockey community, when I was coaching at McGill, I had the luxury to be able to call lots of people, and one of them was Mike Babcock. And so especially later on, when I got a little more experience, I realized that actually asking for help was a sign of strength. So I needed to call on mentors more often. So I was lucky to have Babs there for me and help us get through some of the humps we wanted to get through when we were trying to win the Queen's Cup. But aside from that, I think that when you get into a crisis on the media side, you want to make sure that you've got mentors to rely on to give you some advice, and to put you in the right on the right path, so that you can move forward as quickly as you can. Number 3 is you got to analyze the situation, and that's very important, and sometimes can be a little tricky. It might be a little foggy. Emotions may be part of the problem. Sometimes there's just so much information out there that you got to make sure what is fact and what is rumor. So it is your duty, and that's one of the most important part of your plan is you're going to have to get all the facts right. And you're going to have to keep an open mind. That's my next point is sometimes you're going to feel like, well, you know, this guy's this and this guy's that and that person is this, and you got to make sure that you stay cold-blooded in this, in terms of, you know, being matter of fact and not being emotional about it. So you got to be prepared to do that and take enough time. So you might have to buy time with the media to just say, hey, we're gathering information and we'll get back to you. I think that's what one of the NHL teams, when they had one of their players caught with recently, that's the most recent one that I have in mind, is you know, they advised the media that they knew that something had gone wrong, and they were right on it, but they didn't respond right away and what they were going to do. They needed to get all the facts, and that's what they did. And that's probably the best advice that the PR guys really pushed on me when I called them in the last several weeks prior to this presentation. So follow established plans, and what I mean by that, hockey and media wise, is that at the beginning of the year, for hockey anyway, you know, we have training camp, and before training camp we have a vision on what we want to do. And I'll talk later about it, but you know, want to make sure that as you trying to get through all the fog of this, you don't want to forget that, you know, there's a team that's going to have a game, and especially with us at the NHL level, having a game every other day on average means that you got to turn around fairly quickly so that you've got the right mindset and you're ready to compete on the next game, or else teams are pretty ruthless and they'll really take advantage of you. So you got to be ready for that. And we had a very, very young team. So I'll come back to that later on another page there to kind of show you a little bit of the exact plans that we had in place and what we used. But you've got to make sure you have a media plan as well. So, and I recommend that any coach at the minor hockey level has an idea and has prepared some scenarios so that, you know, if things happen and go sideways, you're ready to react, and you're not caught empty-handed there. So you want to be internally aligned at point 6, and that's important that everybody's on the same page. That goes without saying. So you got to communicate to everybody and make sure that you're on top of things there, so that nothing gets out that shouldn't get out, to make things more complicated than they already are if it is a crisis. And use the correct tonality. You need to make sure that you're reacting according to the situation. So if it is a legal manner, you've got to react a certain way according to that, as opposed to a matter that was not illegal, but in our case there was nothing illegal to it. It was just, you know, it just hurtful. So, and everybody felt bad about it. So that's a different reaction than if it would be legal, or somebody had gotten hurt or harassed or abused or whatever. And obviously you have to have the correct tonality for that. So just keep that in mind. And then number 8, choosing the right people to speak. And I think if you're a minor hockey organization or you're a business, you know, you've got a certain leadership hierarchy there, and you gotta make a point that you choose the right people, so that you don't wind up exposing some of the people that might be involved in the situation, whatever situation it is. So for example, in my case, Ottawa shielded me from the media because they knew that, you know, they would probably poke pretty hard and it would be hurtful to me, and so they were concerned about that. So they made sure, and it was simpler for them in that respect, but they still did it, which was the right thing to do. But I'd never spoke to the media, or very rarely, so that wasn't out of the ordinary. So Guy went to bat for me. Our general manager Pierre Dorian went to bat for me, and we that's how we dealt with the media. And then the players that were involved in the incident obviously had, especially the older guys. So there was a hierarchy as well in terms of you know, like for example, if you're making a lot of money, you're probably going to speak more than a young kid that's just starting and is on a entry-level contract. So, you know, there's got to be some kind of level there. So once you have to speak to the media, the quote from Robert McNamara, who was the Secretary of Defense for the U.S. when they went to war in Vietnam, has a good documentary called Fog of War. And so I recommend it to everybody. He has 11 lessons in there. They're really, really interesting stuff. And so he talks about, in one of his lessons, that in order to end the war, you must put yourself in your enemy's shoes and empathize with your enemy. And so, you know, the empathy here is not softness or compassion to let them do what they want. It's not that. It's trying to make sure that you understand their needs, understand what they're trying to do, and understand where they're coming from. So I think that's important when we're dealing with the media, because for most part, and I know we all have our opinions on journalists and on people on social media and social influencers and whatnot, but let's keep in mind that most of them are good people, are trying to make a living. They got to feed their family, and they're trying to get the information right. And so the point number one is key, is to make sure that we're honest and transparent with them. And when I say transparent, there's a fine line. And for example, if we say that we're going to deal, we're aware of the situation, and we're going to deal with it inside the room and internally, that can be a good message. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it depends. You have to use your judgment in terms of what it is, and that they don't need to know everything that you're going to do, but you need to be transparent in things that are, I think, essential as to, you know, what happened and how, and if we as an organization, do we feel that whether we're minor hockey association or we're any kind of enterprise, do we feel that's bad, or was that okay? Like, people need to know that. So to be able to recognize your mistake, if case may be. And in the case in Ottawa, for example, if I may use that again, you know, our players apologized. They apologized to me, and I'll get to that later. But they apologized to the media as well, in terms of to me and to my family, and so they went out and they were transparent with that. They didn't beat around the bush or pretend that nothing bad had happened. They all felt bad. They're good guys, and like, you know, a lot of us, we get caught sometimes venting, and that's what happened. Three, remember who the message will reach is about making sure that even if you're speaking to a reporter that you may not appreciate that much, you've got to make sure that you remember that you're not just speaking to that reporter. You're not just speaking on Twitter. You're speaking to the people that are reading it, or listening or viewing this reporter or this station or whatever. So you got to always have that in the back of your head, so that you're sending the message, the appropriate message, to those people who are going to be listening. Because if you're mad at a reporter, you're upset at something that some guy said on Twitter, you have to keep in mind that you're not just saying it to one person, you're saying it to a lot of people, and those people are going to read it, and then they're going to make an opinion about you or about the situation according to the information you're going to give. So always keep that in mind. And I wrote down region, province, or national, is because you have to know that if I'm the midget coach and that I'm facing the media one day because my player did something that got out on Facebook, and now the whole world knows about it, and this guy is flying from Calgary to interview me, you got to be prepared for that, because he's not going to ask you just one question. He's going to ask way more than that, because he just spent a lot of money, and you know he's on a mission to get something. So you got to be prepared for that, and you've got to be careful in how you're going to approach him in terms of trying to dismiss him too quickly. You know, same thing if it's just in region, then obviously it's a different ball game there. So I put number 4 there just in case. That would be much more relevant here in Quebec if you're an Anglophone and you do speak French. a little bit maybe, and you're not fully bilingual, then you got to be very, very careful if you do want to respond a question in French to a reporter as a gesture of respect, but that you go on and on and on about an answer, and you may be tripping over some of the words that may not mean to you what it means to francophones, and you might get into trouble. So just be aware of those, so that you don't stumble over your words, and even though you're unwillingly doing it. Number 5 is obviously when we speak to the media, you're going to have to respond in a timely fashion. I mentioned that a little bit earlier, and I think the NHL teams, for example, are very aware of that, and so they'll always try and buy time. If you see different things happening, you'll see that most of the general managers, if they speak to the media, say, well, listen, we're accumulating information, and then we'll get back to you. But you got to make sure you don't let this linger, because the more you linger with social media, then the more people will drag you down and start speculating. I read a lot of stuff about what happened when, when we were, because we found out, just to put you in context, we found out a little bit before it came out. So we were lucky for that. We got a scoop that this thing was coming out, that the cab driver had sold or whatever had sent the video to a media outlet, and then we knew it's going to come out, so we were able to deal with it fairly quickly. But I was reading a lot of things that people didn't know what they were talking about at all, about what was happening in the room or with me or whatever. So you gotta make sure you try and jump on it right away if you can, and then you got to stay. Make sure you stay positive, do not respond to negative comments. And the reason I say that is that a coach I know had an issue with a player that broke curfew, and anyway got a DUI. Next thing you know, some people are calling for his head. He should get fired. It was his responsibility. He had an extended curfew, whatever, and lashing out at reporters or comments in Twitter or other platform will serve you no purpose at all. So you got to stay away from all the negativity for sure. So don't read those things, and definitely don't respond to them. You just got to stay patient and stay the course on that kind of stuff. I put 7 as an important point, because once, even after the incident may die down, people will bring you back to it. I still get answered. When I got hired by Gatineau, I had an interview with the local paper, or local radio, sorry, and they came back at the end of the interview, after speaking about Gatineau, where we were going with that. I got asked again to comment on it, which I was fine with, because, to tell you the truth, I never had the chance to clear it out in the media. So about what I'm going to share with you in the next slide, actually. So I take that up. I take that opportunity to talk about that, but I never referred to it as a negative thing. I never referred to the players as negative. No matter how mad you are at these people, don't use the media to say that. Say it to them in person if you want. I didn't need to do that, and I'll explain to you why later. But if you do don't say it in person, but do not say that in the media. And I've had media call me from Montreal asking me, well, should we sign this guy or that guy as a free agent? And I was very positive in my comments with these guys, because that you've got nothing to win by going any other way than that. Number 8 is playing for a tie, because you got to keep in mind that in all this plan and all these responses and these behaviors that we're planning to do, you always got to make sure that or keep in mind that you're not playing to win. At this time, if you get out with a tie, then that's a good thing. Because it's tough, because a lot of people are just looking to vent on Twitter and other outlets, and so you probably will not see a lot of positive stuff. I was very lucky in that a lot of people were very, very supportive, friends and family, and obviously and hockey people were really good, but I don't even know if I could call it a tie, but I'm very grateful that I can speak about it now, and you guys are attentive to it, because if you would have asked me a year ago if I would have been how I think I would have got out of a situation like that, and I would have said, ooh, probably not very good. So when I'm still involved in hockey, I feel very fortunate about that, and happy I'm still coaching at Hockey Academy on the South Shore of Montreal at the Mortagne. So, and then a lot of my mentors and my buddies that helped me out throughout this kept telling me that, Marty, you just got to stick it out for 48 hours. In 48 hours, it'll be forgotten. So you got to be patient and stay with the plan and stay with the people that are advising you. In our case, our PR guys in Ottawa were outstanding people, really, really strong. And I thought that before anything happened to me. I thought they always counseled Guy and advised Guy very well before every press conference, and it turned to be in my favor when I faced that situation. But coming back to what I said earlier about making as a coach, keeping your team moving forward. Hope I'm on time here and I'm not too long here. Inspiring your team, and I think as a coach, and even though I'm not the head coach, my biggest concern was what's going to happen to the team. Am I a distraction to the team here? And that's the last thing that you want as an assistant coach or any coach for that matter is, I don't want to drag my team down here. And is that what's happening? Should I get out of the way? So I like this book. I recommend it strongly. I think Eric's probably put it in my list of books that I recommended, but if not, it's there. Extreme Ownership. One of the authors is Jocko Willink. Jocko is a Navy SEAL that he's retired now, has his own business, and does a lot of public speaking. Anyway, he talks about what the leader needs to do, and the leader must own everything in his or her world. There is no one else to blame. And so we got to remember that as leaders of our businesses or our groups, that, like, we got to make sure that we control what we can control. And so for me, it was important that I acted the right way with our players. So I listened to our players that were involved. So listen to the people that were involved in the incident, if you want to get all the facts. So I spoke to them. We met in private, like them with me, and I first started by listening to them, and that's what I would recommend. I think by doing it that way, I felt better about it. I felt like they had an ear to speak to. They felt awful. They wanted to apologize. I gave them the opportunity to. I accepted their apology. And then that helped me too when I went into the room afterwards and faced the rest of the group, because that was my biggest concern. Number two is to seize the teaching moment. And the Positive Coaching Alliance talks about that. If anybody's interested, they've got a podcast. And so for me, that was really, really important. So when I sat down with the players that were involved in the incident, after I let them speak and I accepted their apology, I seized that moment to remind them that they've got to be good leaders too, and they've got to be aware of some of the pitfalls in our society now, and that the door is open to speak to me if you're unhappy with something, as opposed to getting out and venting into a cab. So important for us to learn the lessons. I learned some lessons too. If you ask me if I would have changed anything I did, I knew what we were doing in terms of, I knew I took time to make some adjustments to our penalty kill. If anybody's wondering what happened, they were complaining about the penalty kill. But I felt that we needed to be patient because it's a long season. We had a young group and I didn't want to move too fast. And I got asked about a week or two before the incident if we wanted to make some changes. And I said, no. I said, I wanted to stay the course and see where it would go. Didn't think it would get that far, but I still don't regret, because I had my thought from the previous season where I thought we should go and we should be patient. And it turned out that our penalty kill got really, really good. After Christmas, we were top 5 on penalty kill, and so in the long run it worked out. We had that incident, which was unfortunate. Number 3 is address the entire team, because I think you need to lead the way. I mean, the players that were involved could not lead the team at that time for that incident because they felt awful. So they couldn't do not much other than support me through the media and try to be good teammates. I talked to them about being good leaders for the rest of the way, but I needed to lead. And I spoke to Guy and the coaching staff, and I said, I want to talk to the team. Because as an assistant coach, you'll speak to your penalty kill group or to the forwards or to the defensemen, depending on your role, but you'll rarely get a chance to speak to the whole team. And so I wanted to do that, and I did that because for me it was important to get the message across that I was fine. The players that apologized, I had accepted their apology, and then we had to get back to what we had talked about at the beginning of the year. And that's point number 4, which is to remind the group of the preseason vision. And so we knew we had a very, very young team, especially on defense. We were the youngest team by a landslide on defense. So, and in the NHL, that's usually a recipe for disaster. And we knew that as a coaching staff, but that's where we were at. That's the budget we had, and that's where that's where we could go. So we needed as coaches to make sure we put ourselves in a position where our players would understand that growth and going through adversity and learning from it and getting better and better and better would give us a chance to win after Christmas, and hopefully maybe have a chance to make the playoffs. But we knew it was a long shot by any stretch of the imagination. So I reminded the players that we had that vision at the beginning of the year, that we had a team building exercise, and I reminded them that we had talked about, growing and learning, and that this situation was exactly what we were talking about at the beginning of the year. Maybe not to the T, but definitely we talked about adversity, and we wanted to make sure that we knew that we would hit some hurdles, and we needed to learn and move on and progress from that. And so point number 5 being to think in terms of growth. I think that's the most important thing. I think that's a very common thing now in self-motivation is growing, and I think that's the best thing to do. It relieves you from a lot of relieves the pressure on players, to have to think about results. And I know that if we're talking NHL and even some other levels in hockey or other sports, there's a lot of pressure to succeed and to get performances. But really, the best way to perform is to grow, as far as I'm concerned. And so I really believe in that. And it was important for me. And point number 6 is to show that I was fine and that we had a game to play. And the next night, and that I think it might have even been that night that we were playing, and so I wanted to make sure that we were ready to play that game, and when we were gonna compete to the level that we can compete, which was to our best of our ability. So I tried to stress that by my body language and my tone, my emotional tone, so that we were the players were reassured that everything's okay, and we were still a group that was solid, and we were ready to play the game tonight, and we won. Actually, we went on I think we won the next 2, if not next 3. So the guys were great. I think they responded really well. Some of them came to see me and thanked me. The guys that weren't involved in the incident, they just appreciated that I spoke to them and told them where I was at, and it allowed us to stay in the moment on point number 7. I think that's the most important thing. If you're gonna survive at a level like the National Hockey League, where you play every other day, you're gonna have to be in the moment. And that's once the game is over, the next day you got to be ready for the next game. And if you get back to the bench, you got to be ready for the next shift. And so that was my message to the guys, and I think that worked out. That worked out pretty good in the long run. So in conclusion, lessons learned. You got to make sure you stay on task. You got to be matter of fact. You got to act professional. In any business, we know that that's the best way to do it. And when we say acting professional, it means what? Well, it means respect towards the media and everyone else as well. I spoke to a lot of people after what happened. A lot of people were supportive, and a lot of people told me that when you're respectful all the time to different people, that people will be very understanding when you wind up in a situation like that. And so to always keep that in mind, that respect is the key in our social environment and with the people around us. Living in the present moment is important, and moving forward, you got to do that quickly so that you can perform to the best of your ability. And we talked about this, you got to prepare scenarios, you got to prepare for the worst. And, like I said, the PR, one of the PR guys saying the worst unimaginable situation, if you can prepare for it and you have that ability to do that, then I think you're going to be ahead of the game. And always remembering, as a coach or a teacher or in a business, that our journey here is one of growth and development, and to progress and to learn and to be able to share that. And I want to thank you guys for allowing me to share my experience. And hopefully, I'm not wishing that on anybody, but if you do get a media incident around you or to you, then you'll be better prepared for it. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Marty. That was fantastic, and some tangible things that we can use going forward for everyone in the audience in terms of if we ever approach something like that. So again, what we'll do now is go into the breakout rooms. And for those of you who weren't on for the earlier sessions, right now, Crystal Pearl is going to just put you in a group of 4 people, and we're going to have an opportunity to discuss. So quick introduction, your name, where you're from, and we're going to discuss that topic of facing adversity, and talk about that couple key points that you took yourself out of Marty's presentation. And just be patient with the next minute or so as you get into the breakout rooms. And then when we get back, have some questions that you can send directly to me, and I'll ask Marty.
Yeah, just waiting for some people to accept so I can spread them out.
Okay.
Hold on, Zook, I'll get you in somewhere. Let's see. Yeah, they're not gonna. I'll put them in 10. There's 3 there. 2.
And Chris, if you want to just stop recording while we're in the.
Yeah.
You're done now.
Okay, everyone's coming back.
Okay, so we're slowly filtering back from the breakout rooms now. We're gonna open it up to some Q&A with Marty. So just as everyone's coming back here, got a couple questions rolling in. So the first one is going to come from coach from Cardiff in the UK, Andrew Lord, and he says, do you feel it's possible to have a social media presence as a coach, or is it just opening yourself up? Does the risk outweigh the positive rewards? It seems like the majority of elite level coaches stay off social media or use it sparingly.
Yeah. Andrew, maybe I'm old fashioned, but I try not to be on social media platform as best I can. I follow some of the stuff because some of it is interesting to me. I like to participate in triathlon. I'm not very good at it, but so I follow some triathlon stuff there, but some hockey stuff, skills stuff on Instagram, but I don't communicate. I just steal stuff. I don't give stuff on social media platform because I think it could open up a can of worms. That's just how I feel about it. So I just steal the stuff. Like Babs calls it R&D. We rob and we do. So I rob stuff off the Instagram and then a new drill, and then I just take it, but I don't chat on it at all.
And then just to follow up on that, have you seen anybody doing it well where you think they're not going to get into trouble and they share things in a good way? Like, can you think of any, and maybe any accounts in particular that you like to follow that you're like, this gives me some good information?
Can you read that again? The start?
No, just following up on that regarding the social media. Are there any accounts that you follow from coaches, like coaches accounts that you think this coach is doing it right? Like I know you're not one who uses it that often, but
Yeah.
for someone that is there kind of like a benchmark, someone you're like, yeah, that guy does a good job?
Let me see if I could pull up some for the guys here. I got Conquer Hockey, Andrews Hockey. What else do I follow here? I got McGill Athletics. Got to make sure you're on that. Other than that, Freddie Coach I like for individual skills. I've got IHF Hockey. Got to have that too. You can't get away with TSN Official and Hockey Night in Canada. And then yeah, and you got the NHL because you got the highlights, so you can get some highlight goals you can show your kids. So a lot of it I do too is I go on YouTube and get some clips from there. You can get a lot of good stuff that you can show the kids. You know, I coach Bantam and the Sport 2 program in Demartin and Boucherville, so I do that too. So those are some examples, Dave, that I use. Yeah.
Okay, so a question from Ryan Essex relating to your presentation. He asks, your disciplined approach appears to be rooted in responding rather than reacting. How do you teach or train your athletes and staff to learn that method?
You need to plan, and tell you the truth, I hadn't planned for it. I was lucky I had a PR people that had a plan for those kinds of things. I hadn't planned for it at all. So I think you need to plan. You need to have different scenarios. What we do as coaches, and Erks will probably remember, you know, before we entered playoffs, for example, the year we won the cup in 08, we went into a room before we started, and we went through all the scenarios that could happen, and we had the players talk about it and say, okay, what are we going to do? So I think you need to prepare the scenarios and let your players or your employees or just get them involved and empower them into what will be our response for this scenario or that scenario. And so that would be the best way. I found that this really helps tremendously to prepare for events, big moments. It reduces anxiety. It pumps you up. It gets you ready. It makes you feel confident. And I think that would be the best way to do it.
Okay, so this next question is along the same lines, and it's regarding mental toughness. This one comes from Chad Blundy, and he would like to state for the record, he loved playing your PK system. And he says, as we all know, the life of a coach is a constant roller coaster ride over the course of the season and career. While there are some tremendous highs, there can also be a lot of thankless moments. What are some specific strategies you have used and or relied on to develop your mental toughness as a coach over your career?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's good to hear from Chad. I'm glad he's doing well. And Chad, you were our best penalty killer, so I can certainly appreciate your question. I tried to make sure that I work on my relaxation skills, if I can put it that way. I think we had some yoga instructors in the past. Some of the players on the call here might remember. So we did that. We did some breathing exercises in the room. We did all kinds of different stuff. So I'm a big fan of Headspace, and I'm not sponsored by them. So, but I do appreciate going on Headspace and doing stuff there. But the bottom line is I think that we need to be able to be self-aware and practice that. We need to be able to practice our relaxation skills. We need to practice our concentration skills. You can do whatever activity helps you doing that. But we need to work on our mind, not just our body. And as a coach, I think that's really important. I always believe in that. Especially after reading Sacred Hoops with Phil Jackson. I probably read it in '99. That would have been Matt Darch's last year. And, you know, we use a lot of the stuff that I read through that book and some other books. And we did some stuff that was probably thought crazy at the time, but now a lot of teams, a lot of strength coaches, a lot of sports psychologists are using. So, you know, we just did some stuff, and that was the beauty of coaching at universities. And, you know, I could go a little crazy, and I had guys like Erks and Chad that were willing to jump on the bandwagon.
All right, next question. We're rolling back to some more technology stuff. What is your approach to cell phones in the room, and you have a perspective from the pro level, but as well as the junior level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even at minor hockey level, it's the same at the NHL level. There is no cell phone in the dressing room. I at the Sport-Études where I work in the during the winter, I was involved with the midget AAA team, which is the Gaulois at Saint-Hyacinthe, and so they're part of our program. And I was involved with them on the ice once a week. I'd go watch some games and talk with their coaches and stuff. And so they had pouches on the head coach's office door, and players would have to come in, put their cell phone there, and that's midget level. And I think juniors the same. We did the same when we were in Drummondville, when Louis Robitaille and myself were coaching there. And at the NHL level, it's the same. The guys would have to keep their cell phone in the changing area, and then as they step outside the changing area to go to the dressing room, they would not have any cell phones. So you would never see anybody with that there. So there are certain spots in the rooms because they're such big rooms. They have, you've got a lounge at the NHL level, you've got this, you've got that. So there are spots where you can have the cell phone, but the dressing room is a no-no as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, and so that question came in from JF Best. The next question is coming from Joe, and he's talking about defending your players in the media. So as a coach, if a player is not performing up to his standards, for example, can that help improve a relationship by defending him in the media, or how would you approach that situation?
Yeah, no, I think that the general approach should be one of respect. I think the NHL is a different bird that way, in terms of you've got some athletes there that are highly skilled, but sometimes highly demanding in terms of trying to get to them. But I think that's a question of philosophy. I do not believe in doing that personally. I don't think that's constructive long term. Now the NHL is a short-term business, so I mean, if you want some results quickly, that might be something that might work for a week or two, but in the long run, it's probably going to bite you. So I don't believe in that. I think that if you've got to deal with certain people that do not respond well to one-on-one meeting, there might be some other things that you can do. You can do it in front of their own teammates if that's the case. But that's nowadays, I would say that, because of the way society is now, it's less and less a case. I think in the old days, we used to come in and break some sticks in the dressing room when I was younger. Players responded to that. You can't do that no more. It doesn't work. It doesn't make sense with the way we raise our kids now. You don't do those kinds of things. It's not part of our philosophy, our values with our society now. So no, I don't believe in berating a player in the media. I think you need to find ways, and as some of my mentors would say, the best thing that players understand is ice time. It's not comments in the media, or if anything, I think you should not pay too much attention to what's said in the media, because if you start paying too much attention to it, it can get out of hand pretty quickly. I think you try and deal with it when it gets really, really bad, and that was the case that we had. But other than that, I think you just don't pay too much attention to it. Worry about your one-on-one, the way you speak to your players in terms of respect, in terms of building your relationship with your people, so that long-term they grow and they're a little more autonomous in terms of how they motivate themselves, as opposed to waiting for you to motivate them.
All right, Marty, next question is relating to adversity and facing adversity and growing from it. There's a couple terms that get thrown out very often now, and that's resilience, mental toughness, and learning through adversity. And as a coach, how do you look at those topics, and how do you create an environment for players to learn through adversity and develop that resilience or mental toughness?
Yeah. I think you need to work on them, and I'm repeating myself a little bit, but let's say even with our Bantams, I was assistant coach with our Bantams this year. It was my first year at the Sport-Études program, and we had 5 skills that we wanted to work with, and one of the most important one was positive self-talk, and that's the one where I found the kids had the most trouble with. And so there's relaxation. They got to learn to relax and be in the right frame of mind. They need to be able to motivate and activate themselves when, you know, game time is coming. You know, they need to be focused, so they need to work on those kinds of skills as well. But the one for me that's the most important one is positive self-talk, where you talk to yourself and bring yourself back, so that, you know, you're able to be, as you said, resilient. You're able to refocus. You're able to be mentally strong. So, you know, for me, positive self-talk for the younger group, at least, is definitely important. But if you look at even top guys in Major Junior or Midget AAA or even NHL, I mean, these guys are they believe in themselves. They talk to themselves in a positive way. They tell themselves that they're good. They tell themselves that they're going to be fine. You know, I've faced some guys in the NHL that were unbelievable and like seemed like nothing fazed them. And part of it is because they had the right attitude and the right mindset when they were speaking to themselves and telling themselves they were going to be fine.
All right, I think we have time for one or two more. This one's relating to the media, and the media often have their own missions or intended narratives that they want to follow when they're asking you questions. So how do you defend against that in an interview?
Yeah, well, that's a tough one, but that's something that Guy could have addressed more, because he's got way more experience than me talking to the media. But I'll tell you when Guy and I talked about stuff, and when I had to do it at the Major Junior level and a little bit at the university level, not very much, but we certainly had our reporters sometimes. You know, you got to be able to bridge. That's definitely an important ability, to be able to you know, bridge whatever the topic is to where you want to go as a coach, the kind of message that you want to deliver. So that's one thing. You know, you've got to use that a lot. You've got to make sure that you stay simple in your statements too, because the longer you talk, the more they'll grab at what you say and then try to twist your sentence so that the next question now is using your own words, and you don't want to do that. So you've got to be very straightforward and to the point. You know, and sometimes you're just going to have to deflect. You know, you're going to have to make sure that you send it somewhere else so that you can protect your players and protect your team.
And then we'll go with one last one here, and it's talking about hierarchy with dealing with the media and who you allow to speak to the media. But if you're in a position to control who can get to speak to the media, do you think that younger players should not be talking to the media or had limited exposure to protect them and allow them to have the opportunity for growth and learn from older guys? And do you think that's feasible?
Yeah, I think that for sure you don't want younger kids to speak to the media. I think that's very hard skill to master. I wouldn't send a midget kid or bantam kid to speak to the media for sure. Major Junior, they need to start to learn, but you've got to be next to them. In Major Junior, usually you have someone there. It's a PR person usually. If not, if you're a junior B coach or a junior C or you're not a Major Junior team that doesn't have a PR person, then you as a coach have got to be there, and you got to support and be there for your athletes so that they don't wind up at one point trapping themselves or being trapped by the reporter, whether it's willingly or unwillingly. So yes, I think that until they are 17 years old, 18 years old, I would not expose my players to the media. No. I think you need to make sure that you've got people that are adults, people that are mature and that are level-headed, so that you know, you answer the questions the right way, and so it doesn't affect your whole organization.
All right, that's great. Thank you, Marty. And on that note, we'll bring the seminar to a close. Marty, thank you very much. It was an outstanding presentation. And I'd like to thank all of our presenters over the course of the 2 days, and thank the audience for contributing your time and energy. You know, it's been a great experience for me personally, and there's been a lot of positive feedback coming in from messages from people who have been involved. So in closing, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the incredible work of our Friends McGill hockey team that has put together this seminar. And like a championship team, it takes many people behind the scenes pulling in the right direction to make things run smoothly. So on that note, the group that really made things happen were Chris LaPearl on the technical side of things, Marty Raymond bringing the guys together, Liam Heelis gathering attention for the seminar, Neil Blunden on the social media, Ken Moran hosting this morning, Earl Zuckerman sending out press release, and president of the FMH, Mike Nelson, as well as our speakers who contributed so much time and energy putting their presentations together. I'd also like to give an honorable mention to McGill alumnus Lindsay Arkin, who gave us some essential points on making things run smoothly. But aside from that, most importantly, this seminar has been an outlet for all of us involved that have known Kelly Knobs and Martin Ruchet as an outlet to share some positive energy that those guys always shared with us. And I think it's been cathartic for us as a way to use that energy in a positive way. And on that note, I'm going to bring on Liam Heelis to have the closing comments for the seminar.
Awesome. Yeah, in closing, I'd really like to thank our speakers, Peter Smith, Mike Babcock, Jamie Compton, Pat Delisle-Houde, Marty, and Guy. They shared their wisdom, their time, and their leadership with us without any expectations or compensation. And we greatly appreciate you guys stepping up and giving us something all to learn from. And I think we can all take away demonstrations in your generosity. To our alumni organizers, as Eric said, thank you so much. LaPearl, Ken Moran, Irk, Neil Blunden, Zook, and Mike Nelson. Your engagement and support of our program really defines what it is to be a Redman. And we're forever grateful for you guys and Friends of McGill Hockey and your alumni support. And I'd like to personally thank each and every one of you guys for coming out, taking the time to listen and learn with us over the last 2 days. For me, Kelly Knobs was the reason I came to McGill University. He gave me my first coaching opportunity, and he's the real reason I returned to McGill, to learn from him, to be mentored by him. He was a true champion. And I really think he's looking over us, and I can guarantee that he's proud of each and every one of you guys that have put this all together, and we can all be real proud with that. This conference has demonstrated the 4 pillars of Kelly's teaching and of McGill hockey as well. And those pillars are to be relentless, as Babs and Peter had mentioned, to be resilient, just as Marty mentioned, to be accountable, as Guy Boucher had mentioned in his talks, and lastly, as Pat Delisle-Houde said, to be adaptable in all situations. In final, looking at our numbers, we've raised $18,100 and had over 200 registrations. This event's taught me a lot, and I think that's the value and importance of community and family. So this is a big hockey community that we have. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Stay safe, be well, remain vigilant, and I'll hand it back to you, Eric.
And that concludes the seminar. Thank you all for attending, and enjoy the rest of the day. It's sunny here, and hopefully it is where you guys are too. All the best.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here.